Welcome to Next Level Thinking Podcast, Episode 8, Non-Aggression Principle, Part 1, Animals. The reason I'm starting with animals as my first part of the non-aggression principle is that it is the most murderous part of our society, with an average person eating and funding the killing of about 20 animals a year. Billions of animals are killed every day across the globe, trillions if you include marine life. This is no doubt the elephant in the room of the most violent cultural tradition in our society based on sheer numbers, and this isn't exclusive to any country either. You find all countries in the world practice in what is called Carnism, which is using animals for their profit or their products and for profit, and also exploiting them and enslaving them and killing them. Well, murdering them is more accurate. This is no doubt the elephant in the room, the most violent cultural tradition in society based on sheer numbers. So I'm going to start with a quote from Pythagoras, and he says, "As long as man continues to be the ruthless destroyer of lower living beings, he will never know health or peace. For as long as men massacre animals, they will kill each other. Indeed, he who sows the seed of murder and pain cannot reap joy and love." Here's a fun fact. In the Western world, people who refused to buy, use, or consume animal products were called Pythagoreans. So then you might be asking, well, what is the non-aggression principle? The non-aggression principle is simple. It means you do not use physical force against a being unless they initiate it on you. This can also be violated by proxy, or in other words, if you fund or support others who violate this principle, you're also violating the principle of non-aggression. And this also includes human beings, animals, or other forms of life that have sentience, such as the ability to feel emotions and pain. So this would not include plants or bacteria or other life forms that do not have the ability to feel pain. So there's no aggression done if you chop down a tree or if you clean your hands and remove germs. Violating this principle would be like if you punch somebody in the face who didn't punch you in the face, or they didn't steal from you, etc. They didn't do violence against you. Or if you hurt a dog who did nothing wrong, that would be another violation of the non-aggression principle. But I will also be getting more into this of what certain violations of the non-aggression principle are, but I'm focusing on this episode on the elephant in the room, as I said, because animals are the largest violation of the non-aggression principle and the most broad, and it's found in almost all societies, except for maybe certain native cultures, although some societies like northern Indians mostly living a plant-based lifestyle, but they're still mostly carnist, about half, I believe, which is why I'm tackling first, because it's mostly the sheer numbers, and it's just appalling when you watch videos such as Earth Things, which I highly recommend, and I'll have it in the references for you to watch. But you see what is being done to animals, and if you have any sort of empathy at all, you will have to deeply think and reflect upon the choices you've made in life concerning buying animal products, or if you hunt yourself, you'll have to consider the brutality, and just if you just have to see it for yourself, because you can't be described in words. But when you watch it and you have any sort of empathy, there's no justification anymore for doing it, because it's so brutal that you wouldn't want to continue it no matter what, really. And people will make endless justifications for continuing their practices of eating and working in the industries of slaughter and slavery of animals, but there is no justification. It's valid justifications. I will get over the justifications, but ultimately you need to know that there is no justifications, because it's violence, and violence is never just. There's no justice involved in violence ever. There's no justification for violence ever, any kind. And I've gone over some actually violations of the non-aggression principle before. I'll be going in more next episode as well, but this one will be focusing on animals. And let's start with some of the many justifications. This is not all the justifications. People will make up justifications because they've been indoctrinated into the belief that they need to eat meat and consume animal products, such as wearing leather jackets, but there is no need, and I will get into why there's no need to do such a thing in later parts of this episode. 56 billion land animals, 2.7 trillion marine animals are killed every single year globally. Now think about those numbers. It's difficult to even think about those numbers because they're so high, but it's so astronomical that I think if people really understood how large those numbers are, they would be appalled, along with, say, watching animal slaughter footage, the enslavement of animals, the conditions that they're kept in, I think people would change their minds. And people will understand also that these are not anecdotal evidence of cruelties in the animal industry, that this is actually widespread. Murdering animals is always wrong, but it's especially appalling when you see just how intensive the cruelty is towards animals, and they've done nothing wrong, I mean, at all. Like, most of them, first of all, they're herbivorous animals, so they never even violated the non-aggression principle themselves, although it does not apply to animals, and I'll get into that later, but they still have a right to be free and not be tortured and murdered. Animals were some of the first beings on this earth to be enslaved and to be oppressed and murdered. Although slavery has existed since essentially the beginning of quote-unquote civilization, with going back so far as the Sumerians and the Egyptians and the Indus Valley civilizations about a little over 4,000 years ago. But animals were the first to truly be just completely enslaved, like from the moment that they were born to their deaths where they were murdered. And it is theorized that a lot of the techniques that were used for the enslavement of animals and how they were rounded up and kept in cages and murdered and exploited were actually used by totalitarian governments such as the Nazi regime or the Soviet Russia, who created their camps of enslavement, torture, and murder, which makes sense. I mean, if you look at a Nazi concentration camp or a Soviet gulag, and a gulag is a labor camp, oftentimes people were there murdered, you'll see that if you were to take those people out of the gulags and the concentration camps and put animals in, it wouldn't look that different from an animal slaughterhouse. Really, almost everything is about the same, but applied to humans instead of animals. Like, instead of having vets, you'll have doctors. And instead of having machines hooked up to cows to get their milk, you'll have people working in mines and factories. So it's the same philosophy of exploitation and enslavement. In fact, at many of the Nazi concentration camps, there were actually animal slaughterhouses there as well. So that's another aspect to it as well that you have to consider in the analogy or metaphor. And also, if you were to take those concentration camp victims and gulag victims and put them into a slaughterhouse, the conditions are essentially almost the same. They both treated them like property and demonized them, such as you can see the Nazi propaganda posters online, seeing how they demonized Jews, gypsies, the mentally disabled, etc. And you can also see this as well in the American concentration camps. A lot of people don't know about this, or maybe they have a short-term memory, but there were also propaganda posters of Japanese during World War II or around the time, and that was used as a justification for enslaving the Japanese and putting them into concentration camps and indoctrinating them as well. And so you have to understand about what the animals are going through. You have to see things from the victim's point of view, because if you don't see things from the victim's point of view, then you can justify anything. If you don't see them as yourself or as human, that's what a lot of I went into earlier on my episode about militarism and war propaganda. You have to demonize the enemy in order to get soldiers to fight an enemy. You have to make them see like they're barbarians and they're not human and they're not fighting to, say, defend their country. They're demons who just want to destroy everything, and they have no empathy. But that isn't quite the case. That's just what they are made to appear to be by those who own the media, who control also the war profiteers, who also control the media. That's what they do. And it's no different from the slaughter profiteers who have influence in the media as well, and they want to make the animals actually seem like, or they don't have the same importance as us humans, and they want to also make them seem like they're being treated well, but they're not really at all. Like, they have advertisements where they're on happy farms and that they'll be in grassy pastures, cows will be in grassy pastures, but really that is literally not even close to the case of what's actually going on the farms that the food products came from. So you have to view it from the victim's point of view. And if you're not the victim, you have to imagine it in your head. You actually have to literally imagine it yourself. It can be difficult because most people have not been through anything related to hardcore slavery or torture or injustice to that degree that billions of animals experience every day. Almost nobody on Earth experiences it as harsh as they do. Some do, and that's a different story, but it's difficult because we don't experience what the animals experience. You have to imagine it, as difficult as it can be. But when you look at it from the victim's perspective and you can honestly do it, you see things differently and you see that they're actually equals. And you can look and see that animals feel essentially the same amount of pain that we do, especially like pigs, cows, chickens. They all feel pain, and essentially the same amount that we do. If, we were to be punched, that would hurt as much as to them as it would to you. So that's another thing we have to understand. Isn't it weird that when one person dies, it's a tragedy, but when billions of animals are killed deliberately, it's a celebration, and people say it's a great thing. And everyone knows that murder is wrong. It is written in many religions and has been known for millions of years, essentially, in all of humanity. It's something that is known instinctually because of our empathy, and it's not something that you need to write down on a piece of paper and explain to somebody. Everybody just knows it in their own being. And if, say, a bear kills a hiker, they won't say, oh, he wasn't fit enough to survive, or he doesn't really matter. They'll say a bear was a murderer, and he was. But then they'll go get a bunch of guns and go kill the bear, but it never goes in the other way. People don't get outraged. Some people are starting to get more outraged about it and more concerned, but not as much, not even close to as much. There's still a long way to go for people to actually care about the genocide of animals. It's funny that people don't use that argument for when a person kills an animal, such as if a hunter was to kill a bear. All the circle of life, natural order, Darwinianism, it's just an excuse to kill another being with impunity. When the Nazis rounded up Jews and babies were out of their mother's arms, it is similar to when the dairy industry, their calves of cows are stolen from their mothers after birth. And this is also true for other animals, and the babies are taken with days, weeks, or months after birth. And separating families is a psychologically devastating tactic, which is used to weaken one's pride and inhibit their desire to retaliate and fight back. And the Nazis stole this technique from the meat and dairy and egg industries, and they tattooed Jews and others to identify if they were a Jew, gypsy, or mentally disabled. There is also the same in the meat and animal industries, and they're branded in the meat and dairy industries, etc., are branded with hot irons and are ear notched, which means they put tags on their ears. They put a hole in their ears and put tags on them. And this is essentially the same as tattooing or marking on the uniforms of Jews in order to keep track of them, which is necessary in order to run a slaughterhouse or a concentration camp, to mark what you believe to be property, but it is not property at all. And then the Jews were sent to the concentration camps and extermination trucks that were still being used to send animals to slaughterhouse, literally the same trucks. It's insane how the same tactics were used for slaughter of animals as were for millions of innocent souls during the Nazi regime, and others as well, but I'm just using the Nazis as an example. The Jews were treated like nothing, as if their lives didn't matter. And some people, I don't think it's enough for them to view it from the perspective of being the animal, just that individual animal, and seeing the pain and suffering or imagining it. I think if you saw your entire family going through the torture and enslavement, because all of these animals have families, and all of the family, it either grows up or is brought into the slaughterhouse or whatever factory farm to exploit and to yield the animal products. They're all often in one family. So imagine if your entire family, all your friends too, imagine if they were going through the same torture, enslavement, and murdering process. Maybe then people would be angry. Because sometimes it's not enough for someone to just, because of either self-loathing issues or a lack of ego at all. I'm not saying the ego is everything, but you need to have some ego. But even if you don't, you can understand that if all your friends and family and everyone you knew was being tortured, enslaved, just hardcore slavery and torture, and many of them were being murdered, and you saw right before your eyes, I think you'd be upset, to say the least. You'd want to do the same to your captors and your torturers and those who are murdering others. You would want to do the same to them, and you would want to put an end to it in any way it's possible. And that's the kind of attitude that we need to take. We need to end this any way as possible. I'm not someone who's going to say, raid a slaughterhouse like an animal liberation movement. I believe in education above anything else. I think that's really what's going to do it, more than breaking into slaughterhouses and animal exploitation facilities and research labs that are using animals, because if that's done, all that does is save a few animals, because the fundamental belief in society is still there, and they will demonize the animal liberators, and it doesn't work unless you change people's mind. In order to even make people be animal liberators, you have to educate them anyways. So even if you are someone who believes in that, and I can understand where people come from who are part of the animal liberation, because it's just brutal, and they have rights just like us, not all the same rights, but they do have rights to live at least and not be tortured, enslaved, and murdered. They have those rights, so I understand where they're coming from. But education is what almost all of our focus should be on, and because we wouldn't even need animal liberation at all if everyone was educated from the beginning they were born. If they just understood this, we wouldn't have to worry about that. There wouldn't be any enslavement of animals and torture to begin with to liberate. It would just happen organically and naturally. All of the industries would be shut down by their own choices, not shut down by, say, with a gun, but it would be natural and organic, and it would be smooth transition. So even the slaughterhouse workers, they'd be able to find another place of employment to feed their families, etc. Although even that justification that they need to feed the families is not a valid justification. It's not a valid justification to be to do any occupation, and I'll get into that in the next episode. So let's say the animal liberation movement is justified in what they're doing. I think that education would be more important, as I explained, and that's what I'm trying to do here. So that way this process will go smoothly instead of through, say, a violent revolution. Although it wouldn't really be a violent revolution. It would, because you wouldn't be violating anyone's right. It would be a revolution of force. I want a revolution of education and peace and understanding of philosophy, and that every child understands that. I mean, they all do understand, and I'll get into that, but just briefly here, all children understand that animals have, except for maybe a psychopath, someone who's born a psychopath, they understand that animals are not to be commodified and to be murdered, because if you put in any baby, you put an apple and a bunny in a crib, which one are they going to play with? Which one are they going to eat? It's obvious. And if the baby didn't do that, if they decided to play with the apple and eat the bunny, then they're a psychopath. That's all it is, and they do exist, sadly, but that's not the majority of people. If we can get, and I mean majority, I mean that's like not 97% of people are peaceful, essentially, when they're born. They have to be indoctrinated by the 3% of the population who are psychopaths and sociopaths. Maybe it's 4%, but it's around there. And that's the thing. Our society is essentially governed by psychopaths who have advanced knowledge of psychology and understand how to manipulate the media, and they've controlled society and steered it towards evil, do evil things such as animal exploitation and slaughter. And our society is ruled by this 3%, which is why we even have these industries to begin with. Nobody, if it wasn't for this indoctrination, everyone would grow up, and you wouldn't even need to educate children, actually, really. If they just didn't have this, if you just remove the indoctrination that is done by the media, the advertising agencies, who always have advertisements with meat, eggs, cheese, meat, everything, meat restaurants everywhere. If it wasn't for this indoctrination that is introduced by the 3%, and then they get their media puppets and advertising agency puppets to propagate this message for a paycheck, then this wouldn't happen anyways to begin with. And everybody would just understand intuitively. They know it in their heart. They would not even need to be educated because they wouldn't have the indoctrination. This is really more of a process of removing the indoctrination or demystifying rather than education. What I'm trying to do here, although a lot of it is education, I'm trying to understand that people have been indoctrinated and that this is actually, I will again explain also that this indoctrination is hurting them physically and in more ways as well, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. It's hurting the economy, it's hurting the environment, it's hurting society in so many ways and hurting individuals within the society as well, which is one of the reasons why I'm going so much into this. And it's really a lot of these people who psychos who own these industries. It's really a murder industry. And one of the reasons they do it is because they're sick and they just simply love to murder animals. They love it. They love the blood involved. They love they literally gain pleasure from the enslavement and murdering of animals, and they know it's legal. So that's why they love it so much, is because they can get away with it easily. They can get away with it essentially in the open. Although if people did really see and they saw the footage of slaughterhouses, there wouldn't really be that many meat eaters. If everyone was, say, required to sit down for an hour to watch Earthlings or a documentary of animal slaughter, there just wouldn't be many meat eaters, period. And people who would buy and use animal products because they would understand the brutality involved with it, and they would refuse to fund it. I think many people would, not everyone. Some people are really, really thick-skulled, to say the least, in their indoctrination, or they're just psychopaths and they just never cared anyways. That section was Animal Holocaust and Genocide, and the next section is the philosophy of a plant-based lifestyle. And a plant-based lifestyle is an extension, essentially, of the non-aggression principle. And it means you oppose the violence done towards animals. They don't want to see animals tortured, used for research, murdered, enslaved, abused, exploited, etc. The question should we be asking is, are we harming another sentient being or a being with emotions and thoughts in order to gain the resources we use on a daily basis or at all? We need to ask that question above anything else. It's the only question we should ask when it comes to the morality of a diet or a lifestyle, plant-based diet or plant-based lifestyle. Our food choices have implications, natural law implications, and this is best understood as the law of karma or karmic law, that our actions have consequences. So if you do some sort of violence, say if you were to torture an animal, you're going to have consequences either in the short term future or even immediate sometimes. Like the animal might bite you back. It could be short term, so maybe like a couple days later you might have a situation arise where maybe someone in your family got hurt or you got hurt. Probably more likely, like you say, maybe you were working in the machinery in the factory farm, and you accidentally tripped and fell and maybe you broke a bone or something. Or it could be in the future, such as maybe a couple of months or years from now, you figure out that you actually were fired from your job and the place that you work at shut down, and now you're without a job for years because you couldn't find employment. Or it could even be, and this one's, I don't want to get super religious or spiritual here for this section yet, but even in potentially other lifetimes, it could have negative implications. So maybe the next lifetime, for example, you'll be born with deformities or whatever. I think that's a possible theory of why some people are born with better advantages than others, is because of what they did in the previous life. I don't want to say for sure. It's a bit of a theoretical. It's something I have to understand a little bit more, be more into the philosophy and more spiritual and schools of philosophy to understand, but it is possible. And if you understand things such as quantum physics, string theory, and how energy never dies, it's always transferred, the law of conservation, it's possible. Reincarnation is a possibility. Let's just say that. I'm not saying it's definite though. The animals have a purpose, and their purpose is to just live, and for the most part they just leave us alone. I mean, even carnivores, they aren't constantly hunting us, and especially in today's society we have things like guns and walls walls, and we have cars and stuff that can help us deal with these predators, and we have ways of making sure that we protect ourselves from them, just like they have ways of protecting themselves against us. And we don't want to, we just want to be left alone from these animals, and they just want to be left alone for us. So why don't we just return the favor? Why do we have to go and torture and enslave and kill them, etc.? When's the last time you've had an animal actually attack you? I mean, I'll work out outside in the mud. I like to ground myself and stuff, and I'll get bit by ants, but I don't kill the ants. I might flick them off. It's all right. Ants won't feel pain they have an exoskeleton, so it's all right if you pick up an ant or flick them off, because they don't have the ability to feel pain in their exoskeleton. Now, if you crush them, that's a different story. I try not to crush them. I think that's not justified, or to, try to step on their homes. If you try to step on an anthill with some ants or fire ants, you're going to see what happens real fast. You're going to see that they definitely want to be left alone. They will attack you viciously. And I've done that accidentally. I try not to. Just, be aware of where you step. That's another philosophy of like ahimsa, I think it's called. It's a part of the Dharmic religions, which is the Indian religions, such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism, especially Jainism. A lot of people have heard that, but their main tenet is nonviolence. And one of the aspects of that tenet of ahimsa and nonviolence is to watch your step, which is what we should do, because we might be stepping on animals, and we don't want to be even unintentionally killing animals. Although sometimes it's difficult to avoid because we're much larger than certain animals, and they can be hard to see, and we have things to do. But there's a difference between intentionally and unintentionally killing an animal, and there's also a difference between self-defense and aggressing against an animal. If you're trying to kill animals in self-defense, such as a parasite, a rabid dog that's attacking you, or a bug infestation that is infesting your property, you have the right to defend yourself against that. But, you should also not get into a situation where that happens to begin with. You shouldn't be walking around the woods where you might be in a situation where that can happen. I mean, like, not all the time. Obviously, if you want to go on a hike, that's fine. But not like where you would be all the time out there in the woods for no reason. And, you should try to keep your house clean to prevent insects and infestations to begin with, so you wouldn't have to, defend yourself from them. And you have the right to kill animals, like if they're destroying your property or doing violence to others or yourself. But what we do for hunting and animal agriculture is not defense at all. It's aggression, and they didn't attack us, so we have no right to do it. People who follow a plant-based lifestyle also don't use medicines that have animal products in them, or like leather interiors of cars, or wool jackets, or consume eggs, honey, dairy, meat products, or their byproducts. And they don't attend entertainment of animals, such as circuses, zoos, aquariums, or events that exploit animals for entertainment or pleasure. In this next episode, or this next section, I'll be going over having a plant-based lifestyle and how it affects freedom and peace, which are essentially the same thing. The freedom is the freedom to be free from violence. That's what essentially freedom is, which is also known as peace. Essentially, what the animal industry is a bloodletting ritual and animal sacrifice ritual. And a lot of people who, as I mentioned before, run these industries are psychopathic and are what is called dark occultists, which means they have religious reasons essentially for doing the sacrifice. And the sacrifice, they believe that they will essentially, well, not only for pleasure, because they are psychopaths, many of them, almost all of them really, and they believe they can gain power by doing these rituals. So we have to ask ourselves, are we contributing to this suffering of animals? And do we have the right to take their lives? Well, no, we do not. So that means that we need to adopt a plant-based lifestyle. So if you can even go, like, one of the best ways to do such a thing, to go to a plant-based lifestyle from Carnism, is to just take one less day a week, or one less meal a week. Use the Kaizen philosophy, which is the philosophy that and one of the reasons why you have to do this slowly most of the time. I went cold turkey. That's because I don't think I ate much meat before. I didn't have a big attachment to meat. or animal products such as dairy, eggs, or leather or whatever. I didn't have much of attachment to it, so I was able to do it cold turkey. But some people, if they did do cold turkey, they just immediately quit one day. It would cause withdrawal symptoms like a drug or alcohol addict, and it would cause them to suffer very harsh psychological issues and physiological issues, which would even cause their death for those who are very carnist and eat a huge amount of meat. So you want to do this slowly. If you think that you are one of those people, so you can possibly try just quitting. I think some people can do that. You just have to find out what your body's able to withstand the withdrawing, what your symptoms are. But just try going one at a time. Just replace a meat meal with a meal that has plants in it, and your body will get used to this, and you'll actually start to like and have a greater taste of plant meals. So maybe say you really like meat because you've been eating it for so long, your body adjusts to it and you like it more. I bet when you first ate meat, it's probably like when you were young, you didn't like it that much, but it's like an acquired taste. Everything essentially about food you need to understand is everything is essentially an acquired taste, because the way our gut bacteria adjusts to food, it grows accustomed and begins to like foods that the bacteria in your gut forms based on the foods that you eat. They start to like it, and you start to like it as well psychologically. So essentially, if you eat a little bit more plant meals and eat less meat meals and dairy and egg meals, then you'll start to like the plant meals more and the meat meals less. So eventually, if you just push more towards the plant-based meals, it'll be easier and easier and easier, and eventually you'll have no desire to eat meat. I have no desire. I've been eating a plant-based diet exclusively for a year, and I have no desire to eat meat. I've never really had a desire to eat meat. Some people, you'd be surprised how easy it is to switch to a plant-based diet, how easy that the transition can be, because I think a lot of people feel like we need to eat meat, and that's just not true. And for me, it was more of a convenience thing. I don't think we ever really needed to eat meat. I've never liked meat. My parents sometimes got a little angry because I wouldn't eat meat. I never really liked it that much. It's a personal preference. I never really liked it. But it was more of a convenience thing. When you're a child and you don't have any other options and everyone else in your family eats meat, it's easy to do so. So some of that can also be convenience. It's difficult if you live in a family where everyone eats meat and you want to eat because you have to kind of make it for yourself, or you have to go buy your own food. But a lot of people do eat plant-based food still. You just have to a lot of people eat things such as like bread or salad, or foods such as that, plant-based foods, and you just got to transition to more of that instead. Foods that you probably already eat. So you can do that too. Just transfer the foods you already eat more of those and less of the meat ones. You want to make sure you have a balanced diet though, because if you transfer to a plant-based diet and you're eating things like Oreos and just really unhealthy foods, it can make you really sick, and you might think, well, maybe it's because I'm eating a plant-based diet instead of an omnivore diet, or herbivore diet instead of a omnivore or carnivorous diet. But the reason that you're suffering is because either you're having withdrawal symptoms and you just need to bear through it kind of a little bit. Withdrawal is inevitable if you're someone who has addiction or a severe craving for meat. Or it could also be that you didn't do a plant-based diet right. Because if you do it right, you're going to feel amazing every single way possible. You're going to feel physically high energy. You're going to feel stronger. You're going to lose weight. If you're trying to do that, it feels great if you do it right. And it's very easy to transition if you eat the right foods. If you don't, though, people say there's something wrong with the diet, such as in the Vegetarian Myth book that tries to debunk the plant-based diet. People will say that, oh no, it's the issue with the diet. We're omnivores, not herbivores. We are herbivores, and I'll get into reasons why. But the reason I recommend people eating raw, whole, unprocessed fruits and vegetables is because this is probably the healthiest diet on earth, and more healthy than any diet I can even think of. I've looked at a lot of diets and done some research about them, and this is the most natural diet and organic diet that we've had for millions of years. It's not a new fad diet. Eating raw, unprocessed fruits and vegetables is what made us human, and I'll get into how that made us human. But this diet is sustainable, and I don't want people to transfer towards a plant-based lifestyle and think that because they got sick because they decided to do it incorrectly, that there's something wrong with the diet. It's because, there is something wrong with your diet if you just eat sugary, high processed foods that happen to be plant-based only, but you need to understand that it wasn't, you can eat these if you want. There's no moral issue with eating Oreos and foods that are made only with plants. There's no problem with it. It's just that I don't want people to think that because they're suffering issues, it's an issue with the herbivore diet, the plant-based diet. It's not. It's an issue with how you did it. It's not inherently the issue of a plant-based diet. It's more of a processed and sugar issue. That's why I recommend raw, whole, organic fruits and vegetables. So such as eating an organic apple or organic oranges, organic spinach, raw, so it's not frozen as well. Something to look out for. It's not in a box. You pick it up, you eat it. That's the most nutritious diet ever. And it's really the only diet we're supposed to be eating, really. Like, if you want to maintain maximum health, if you truly want to. Gary Yourofsky is a Jewish proponent of a plant-based lifestyle, and he talked to many people in Israel, and he said, raise your hand if you're opposed to the Allied forces going into the concentration camps and murdering Nazis to save Jews, Gypsies, and others. No one raised their hand. So he said, well, no one's really opposed to violence completely, because what about the violence of animals? And they said, well, it's alright to do so to chickens and turkeys and pigs and cows, etc., if it's done to receive animal products from them. And, the thing about pacifism is, like, the idea that animals wouldn't have the right to defend yourself. Pacifism is essentially the idea that you don't have the right to defend yourself. So you just have to let all the evil in the world go on endlessly, and you can never defend yourself physically. This is not a healthy way of thinking. It is understandable, but it's not healthy. And there are some ways, we don't have to be constantly attacking those who do violence towards others, and I still think education is the best. I believe that, sometimes force has its place and it doesn't need to be used, but would you rather have a pacifist fighting for you or someone who is open to the idea of, liberating yourself if you were in a prison unjustly? Would you want someone to go out and campaign and try to get you out of prison and advocate for you, or you want someone who would do that and also, as a last resort, they would also try to liberate you from the prison? Who would you want more? And the thing about these people who work in slaughterhouses, some of them, I don't think all of them are, but a lot of them, they just continuously do their job until it doesn't pay anymore, or at least doesn't pay well enough, because these people only care about a paycheck, many of them. That's most people, reason they do any job is for paycheck. I'm not doing this for a paycheck. I don't get any money from this. It actually costs me, I lose money. And I do work a part-time job, probably about the same as much as I do this, but actually I probably do this even more and I don't get paid. So, my value is to educate people and tell people understand I do have a passion for this as well, but ultimately the main reason I do this is because it needs to be done. This animal genocide and slaughter is the only thing that's going to end up is complete chaos for all of humanity and possibly even end us. The global karmic consequences are astronomical, and it's destroying the environment, and this literally could be the end of the human race because of this. I'm not even exaggerating. And some people in the slaughterhouses and animal exploitation industries will never stop unless they no longer receive funds, or ultimately if they don't have violence done against them. It's not violence, so it's really more accurate to say force to liberate the animals. It's actually liberating them. They won't do anything unless force is threatened against them. And like what they're doing, they're killing, slaughtering, literally raping animals with machines to impregnate them to get other animals to breed and for milk, and they just do it on and on for days and days, hours and hours a day, hundreds of animals. And you look at some of the slaughterhouse footages and you see how these people treat animals and how they curse at them, swear at them, they beat them. Some of it is not even legal practices. I don't want to get into legality. This is a violation of natural law first. It doesn't matter what man's law or government says. It's completely immoral. It should not be going on, period. It's a violation of natural law. but they go overboard a lot of times. And I think a lot of them really are not just people who want to get a paycheck. I mean, a lot of them are, and it's unfortunate. And they still are going to have to pay for the consequences of their actions. But I think a lot of them really, when you look at the footage, though, they go overboard. They curse at them. They'll beat them for literally no reason at all, throw them around. It's unbelievable. And if you look at all the revolutions and throughout history, all of them that were really truly successful were not exclusively pacifist. I mean, even the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, French Revolution. Although I'm not saying all these revolutions are justified, but they were successful, at least for a time. Their regimes and their empires and the nations that followed from it, they were successful because they believed in self-defense. But every revolution that has ever existed was not exclusively pacifistic. They used force to achieve their ends. And such as the American Revolution, from my understanding, it was completely justified. And, the Haitian Revolution and the early parts of the French Revolution, the absolute brutality and violence that was being done against people, they had the right to defend themselves against their tyrannical overlords. And the animals have that right too, and those who try to liberate them had that right as well. And the problem with pacifism also is that it just isn't effective on its own a lot of times. Like the Indian Revolution that was done by Gandhi and others. Gandhi he had quite a bit of influence. He was a great catalyst and helped get people to understand the slavery of the Indians and how they're just being exploited by the British. But what really ignited the fire was the Indians and the sepoys, the soldiers who were being exploited, who stood up and united together and physically fought against the British and wore them down and drained their economy of the Indian exploitation that was done by Britain. So eventually Britain decided to let them go because they were too much of a hassle and they were getting too violent with them, or forceful I should say, and they no longer economically benefited them because they were economically sabotaging the British to the point where it was no longer profitable to exploit them. So they had the right to do that, and it was effective. The Indian Revolution was effective. That's why India is a free country now instead of still under the rule of British. Is not because of Gandhi exclusively. Gandhi was a catalyst, but he wasn't the one he wasn't like the final straw. If it was just Gandhi and a couple people who were well educated into this, or many people were educated into this, it wouldn't have been enough, because the British were psychopathic, ruled by psychopaths and their order followers, stormtroopers, who would do anything that they ordered to do for a paycheck. And they were going to enslave and they were going to exploit the Indians for essentially an infinite amount of time, unless they stood up and united and did something about it. And the same is true for animals too. Some people just aren't going to change. It's just sad, but it's true. No matter education, these people are often low IQ, not very intelligent, and have no empathy. Some of these people who own these industries and work in the slaughterhouses, and they just need to they need to pay for their crimes. I'll just say that. This next section is plant-based lifestyle and spirituality. This idea of the law of assimilation, which means what you put into your body affects you in certain ways. And the consequences of eating meat, for us, it causes harm because of the fact that it's immoral, and we're held to a higher standard than the animal kingdom. So the reason why we suffer isn't just because of physical issues, it's because it's immoral, and essentially it's nature's or the universe's or God's way of punishing us for acting immoral, because if we ate meat, then we had to either fund it or kill it. So that's why we suffer I'll get into how we suffer from eating meat and animal products. But since we are held to that moral standard, eating meat and animal products causes us to suffer. And if you aren't concerned with alleviating the suffering of other beings, then you're helping contribute to the enslavement of others. Another part of the law of assimilation is that the more simple a food is and the less processes it had to go through, in order to make, the more direct the form of energy and the more benefits you'll get from it. So the thing about animals is that when you eat them, you're essentially eating recycled protein and recycled nutrients, because the animal had to consume either other animals or other plants, and those other animals either ate plants, or they ate animals who ate animals who ate animals who ate plants. Ultimately, all protein, all nutrients comes from plants. Carnivores and omnivores get their nutrients from animals who ate plants. That's how it works. So why would you have the middleman? Cut out the middleman and just get it directly from the plants. And because you're getting direct from the plants and it's not going through more processes, it's more whole and natural food. So it's a more direct form of energy, and you're getting higher yields per calories too. Plant foods have the highest amount of almost any nutrient you can think of. Like soybeans have higher protein than any meat in the world, period. You can look it up. And plant foods have the highest amount of some nutrients you can only get from plant foods, like fiber is the only way you can get it, and in higher yields as well. Like any nutrient, the highest amount you can get in a plant-based food. You can look on the nutrient facts and compare the serving sizes of meats and animal products and dairy, and you will find that the plant-based foods always win over the meat and animal product-based foods every single time. So these are just hard facts. I'm not making this up. This isn't just exclusively some spiritual or mystical idea and law. It's really scientifically proven quite a bit. And all of that negative energy too that goes into the slaughter of animals and the torture and their animal products, the fear is essentially put into us, and by eating the meat from the animals that was in a constant state of fear, enslavement, and torture, we put that into our bodies, and it causes that to us. It causes us to suffer not only those physical issues, which I'll get into, but it also causes us, it can cause us things such as self-loathing issues, or to be more stressed. I will go into later, but there's also mood issues. It can cause depression, and that's or it can cause us to have all sorts of psychological issues, because you are what you eat. That's a common saying, and it's so true. And, there's also this idea of hard meat, which is when you slaughter an animal, which is unjust, but when you slaughter an animal, you're supposed to do it quickly, without pain, and without the animal being tortured. So this is kind of where the idea of free-range meat, etc. comes from. The reason why this form of meat is better for you, one of the reasons of that free-range meat, true free-range meat, a lot of it's just propaganda technique and it's not really free-range, but the reason why cows roaming in open pastures who aren't tortured or enslaved, the reason that it's healthier is because you're not consuming as much of that negative fear energy, that negative energy that the animal receives. And that's one of the reasons why that kind of meat is better for you. And that's well known, that free range meat is better for you than factory farm meat where they're enslaved, tortured for their entire lifetimes. And that's one of the reasons why free range meat is better. And, free range milk and eggs, and that's the philosophy behind it. And that philosophy also applies, to not eating animal products at all. You'll receive no negative energy. So that's even better, way better than free range. Those animals are also genetically modified and have antibiotics put in them too, and, fed genetically modified foods. And, what that's doing to us is also genetically modifying us, and it's also putting those antibiotics into us and those growth hormones and whatnot. And people wonder why they're overweight. Well, one of the reasons is because you're getting those hormones, antibiotics that was put into the animals to make them grow as large as possible. And what that does to us, it makes us overweight and fat because of that. And it's also genetically modifying us. This could also be affecting not just you, but since it's genetic modification as well, it could also be affecting your children. So you have to consider that if you're planning on having children and stuff, that this genetic modification, which is the thing about GMOs, is almost all animal products are GMO. And it's also true for fruits and vegetables as well. And almost all the meat products have antibiotics and also hormones injected into them. So, you're consuming that, and that's another problem I'll get into later, but that's just going into briefly here over on topic. And some people saying Dr. Morris, when he was in his 20s, he would just eat oranges all day And, oranges are very healthy for you. If you're eating them raw and organic, which he was, they can provide pretty much all the nutrients if you eat enough of them. That's true for a lot of fruits. You can just eat that all day. You can eat one fruit all day, and it'll probably give you most of your nutrients that you need. I mean, I still say to keep balance, make sure everything's good, check your nutrients and stuff, and be very factual about it. But, when he was on this diet, he had so much energy, and it felt like he had a higher state of consciousness, and he was able to have prophetic dreams where he could have a dream and then the event would happen in real life afterwards. And according to Charles W. Leadbeater, which is a theosophist, which is essentially a mystical Christian religion, he says that this human life, is a stage in our development towards other higher forms of life that await us after we die. And that what our first step to do in this life is to make our bodies whole and to make sure that we live a righteous life. And we need to keep this body pure. And one of the ways of keeping it pure is by eating foods that are not negative, that don't have negative energy involved, which would include meat. And he advocates for not eating meat. He still advocates for eating animal products, but this is like in the 1920s, so this guy was far advanced for his time. And many of the theosophists, it was a cult tradition, and these are some of the most intelligent people in the world, the theosophist, and I would say he was definitely one of the most intelligent people in the world. So he is far ahead for his time. And he says that you should not have any undesirable foods put in the body. So, you want to eat healthy as well, not just avoiding animal products, but you just want to eat healthy and, live a righteous life. Don't do violence to others, etc., or to animals. And some people have a hard time understanding this practice because of their personal habits and desires. And some people say, well, this doesn't really matter in spirituality. But, even if you don't want to get into the spiritual aspect of it, that's understandable, but it's so proven scientifically. If you're a very left brain person, I'm pretty left brain, honestly. I might not always seem like it, but I'm more balanced. But I would say for most of my life I was very left brain, and I can understand from a scientific perspective that there's so much harm to eating animal products, and I'll get into that in a later section. But in Mr. Barnwell Booth, the chief of the Salvation Army, said that eating a plant-based diet, he insists that this diet is necessary for purity and to control the appetites and the passions, which are often the source of great temptation. So he's saying that by adopting a plant-based diet, you can help control, say, your temptations or addictions. Say, if you're, addicted to certain negative habits, maybe maybe biting your nails or drugs and alcohol, that this can help control that. So if you're having those issues, it can help as well. Or other sins. Ultimately, nothing is more important than what goes beyond the physical plane, and the heart and the soul of a person is more important than the actual physical body. However, saying that, there's really no separation between the two, and there's no reason why we can't have a healthy body and, a healthy heart and soul, and, act in accordance with peace and love. And, the lower self, the human body, and the spiritual self, the higher one, should be like the other, because there's ultimately no separation, and it's like one affects the other. So you need to act right, you need to be healthy, and make sure you follow a peaceful diet and lifestyle. And it's a law of correspondence where the upper affects the lower, and the inner affects the outer, the higher affects the lower. And the law of correspondence is kind of like the idea that if you look at a picture of a galaxy and you look at blood vessels in somebody, it's like the same thing. The entire universe at any scale is similar. Despite one being very tiny and one very large, the entire universe is essentially the same at all levels. It's a little complicated. There's a great video on it. I can link in the description where Mark Passio goes into this, and he's another occult teacher, and he goes more into this. I'll link it in the references. Essentially, negative energies and entities, or beings, in other words, after we die, the part of the theory is that they will want to attach to us, and it'll make our life after death more difficult, and we'll have to work out these desires and kind of go through a purgatory, which is, it's the idea in Catholicism that after you die, you have to work off all of your sins. it's essentially the same concept. You have to work out your sins before you can get into heaven. So if you commit a small amount of sins, you have to do a small amount of work. If you commit a great amount of sin, then you have to do a great amount of work. But it depends on how much you do, and that is something to also to consider. The sins of butchering, enslaving, torturing, or funding that of animals is also, we're going to have to work off that as well in order to achieve a higher state of being. The average man or woman is not really a brute, and they mean to be kind and to be respectful, but only if they knew how to do this. But people do not realize that they're taking place in this awful crime, but facts are facts that you cannot escape from the consequences of taking place in this crime and abomination, and everyone shares the responsibility for taking part in this who do. So you might be asking, well, what can we do to improve this? We're only a couple people in this versus the masses of humanity. And it's only by a couple people rising above the rest and becoming more civilized and more peaceful and truly enlightened than others in order to achieve higher civilization and to raise the awareness of everyone as a whole. So a few people have to start, a few people have to be the innovators, the risk takers, in order to get the more common people to adopt a plant-based lifestyle. And there is a golden age to come for humanity, not only for man, but for also the animals as well, when we will realize our duty to animals, not to destroy them, but to help them and to respect them. And maybe even one day we'll be able to prevent, carnivores from murdering other animals, and we'll be able to, maybe say genetically modify them or to enlighten them and change their biology to make them herbivorous so we can prevent violence done on this earth. And it will help the morphogenic field, which will help create a more peaceful earth all over for all organisms. And the morphogenic field might sound like crazy spiritual idea, but like if you look at 9/11, the traumatic effects of 9/11 affected everyone on the whole earth a little bit. Like very tragic events, not just 9/11, but multiple tragic events can affect consciousness and can cause people to be anxious, even if they have no knowledge of the event somewhere across the globe. This is scientifically proven fact. So I'm not just making this up or saying it's just some crazy mystical spiritual idea. It's actually, it will cause so much peace and prosperity for humanity and animals if we stop this practice. And we all have to realize that ultimately we were all created by a higher being than ourselves, including the animals and all life on earth was created by a higher being, and that we're all essentially children to this higher being. And so we're all family, and we should respect each other because of that. And the law of correspondence and the law of assimilation and the natural law or karmic law are laws such as the law of gravity and the law of electromagnetism and thermodynamics. These are scientifically provable and you can read studies about them, but you can also figure them out for yourself by using gnosis or personal experience. You can find out, what is true from personal experiences by experimenting as well with natural law. But these aren't my beliefs or anyone's beliefs here. These are facts, and you can do some deep research and truly understand this. You won't be able to find this sort of information on mainstream sources such as, the news, on TV, or mainstream publications and books, or most movies. But you need to look at some of the alternative information sources in order to understand this. Even the alternative media has some questionable stuff, but you have to do some deep researches on websites that they aren't always the most professionally made, and you have to look through like multiple pages of a search engine, and definitely don't use Google. I went into another episode why, but you need to use a true search engine like DuckDuckGo that is not biased towards certain preferences or cognitive bias, etc. And you need to really search through and look on websites and figure it out for yourself. You can't just read about it on mainstream sources, and even if you just read on the websites on the internet, you really need to find out for yourself. It's the best way to find out the understanding of natural law and like non-aggression principle. Just find out, and because you can't really find this stuff on mainstream sources because they're controlled by people who don't want you to know this, because the same people who own the meat industries and slaughterhouse and egg and dairy industries control and influence the media and fund and receive funding from them, etc. So you have to go to sources that are non-biased and there's not a lot more mainstream because the mainstream sources, all they care about is money, and they get big money from the animal industries a lot of times. So you won't see on mainstream sources so much criticizing the animal industry. So you really have to do some deep searching, and it takes time. But I'm going to try to go over in this episode a brief overview, but you always have to do more research, and I have plenty of research in my references. I am extremely extensive in my references, and you can read, and if you read through all this and watch all the videos, I guarantee you, although you don't need to always watch all the videos. I have certain ones that I would recommend over others, but if you do, you will have such a great understanding that you will absolutely, pretty much no matter how indoctrinated you are or whatever, you'll understand the importance of a plant-based lifestyle and why you need to transfer to a plant-based lifestyle. Another aspect of the law of correspondence is also that, one of the reasons why you see so much environmental destruction because of the animal industries is part of the law of correspondence as well. In karmic laws, we are in the animals who continue to engage in the practice of eating animal products and consuming animal products. That is having an effect on our environment, a negative effect on us and the environment of the whole world. So many environmental effects are because of our refusal to accept the truth that animal exploitation, violence, and slavery is immoral, and so we are being punished by essentially the universe, the creator, nature, God, whatever you want to call it. So we need to align ourselves with the truth that this is immoral, and we need to continue our practice of using and exploiting animals and murdering them. Another aspect of the law of correspondence is that what you do to others is reflected back into you, and then what we do collectively and individually affects our entire reality. So therefore, if you want to live a peaceful life and free of stress and anxiety and angst, you want to live a life of peace towards others, and you don't want to do violence to others or fund it. So that's why we need to end this practice. One of the reasons why we need to end this practice of violence against animals, because we want, we all say we want to live a peaceful and prosperous life and free of stress and anxiety, but a lot of people aren't willing to do the things that are required. And this is an absolute requirement. It will not happen on this earth unless we decide to end this practice. One of the reasons why it's so important, and then I'm starting the non-aggression principle with this one, because the sheer numbers is just destroying the potential of humanity to live a truly peaceful and prosperous world. I mean, we could have so much understanding of ourselves and knowledge and peace and love, and our environment would be so much cleaner. We'd have more advanced technology. It would be unbelievable the amount of stuff we would be capable of if we just decided to live peaceful lives. We are essentially a fish that is getting devoured, and we might be devouring other smaller fish below us, such as the animals, and below us as in we perceive to be below us anyways, and our idea of their consciousness and their intelligence. All animals are quite intelligent, more intelligent than us in certain ways, but we're essentially a medium-sized fish eating a smaller fish, and the big fish is eating us. So it's eating everything, and that big fish is natural law of consequences and the law of correspondence, and God, universe, nature, mother nature, whatever you want to call it, is destroying us because of our actions and violations of their laws. We're being punished because of our negligence and abuse of nature and each other, and because of this, we're being destroyed. And honestly, it's the way it's supposed to be. It's called justice, If somebody was destroying your house, wouldn't you try to destroy them? That's essentially the same philosophy. It makes sense. It's understandable. It's not immoral or wrong that this is the way the earth is going. It's because of our ignorance and our apathy and our lack of action. And it's understandable, and there's nothing wrong with what the universe, nature, God, Mother Nature is doing to us, because we're getting what we are getting because we continue to do the same actions which harm our environment and nature and animals and innocent human beings and animals who've done nothing wrong. And we need to be peaceful if we wish to see a world that is more peaceful and prosperous and a cleaner environment and less destruction on earth and chaos. Charles W. Ledbetter said that when he went to Chicago, and Chicago is a city that it still is today, but historically has been a massive center of animal slaughter and Upton Sinclair wrote about the abuses in his most popular book, and was about the abuses of the workers and the conditions of animal slaughter in Chicago specifically. And psychics say in Chicago that they feel a sense of horror upon entering. They can't quite say, they might not even be aware of the slaughter, but they feel dread and they feel an evilness in the air. Like, it's kind of a gut feeling of just, like, if you walk in an area and it just makes you feel bad, like you maybe walking around at night and you walk near an area of town or whatever and it doesn't feel right and you feel like something wrong's going on here, your gut feeling, intuition, whatever you want to call it. That's the kind of feeling they get from it. And I'm sure many people feel this as well. They might not be consciously aware of it, but they feel like something's wrong with the area of Chicago. I mean, there's also a lot of issues with crime in Chicago as well, but this was during the 20s when Charles Lederbeater was writing about this. And he said the depression, nervousness, and anxiety was so common, and the influence of this industry, it goes over the city like a plague cloud. And then you have to understand, like, each one of these creatures not only suffers in this life, and I mean, that's enough in its own. I mean, the torture and the pain that they go through their entire lives for decades. A lot of these animals live to 10, 20, 30 years, some longer, just being enslaved the whole time, then brutally murdered at the end. These life forms are just like us, and after we die, we will have bodies after this one, and those animals, just like us, aren't going to suffer in this. They're going to suffer in the next life as well from the injustices and torment that they haven't been inflicted with. So, I mean, that's just even worse to consider, and another reason why we should end this practice. And then during this time, in the 1920s, slaughterhouse workers were oftentimes children, and they would often be pale, sick, unable to eat and sleep, as they'd be so depressed and have so much anxiety. And they would go to religious ministers and talk about their issues, since that's what most people did in those days when they had mental or issues. There were people who were more religious, and they would say they'd be willing to starve, but they could not go and work in this job anymore and see blood and the horrors of the slaughter. And then they couldn't sleep, and they would have suicidal thoughts. And this is not uncommon for slaughterhouse workers even today. But, I mean, imagine a child going through this. That is unbelievable. And, they would be forced to do this work oftentimes so that way that they could pay for their family to live, since the economic situation wasn't that great for many in major cities during the 1920s. Poor families in the 1920s in places like Chicago. Charles Lederbeater goes on to describe that these children who work in these slaughterhouses in Chicago, the only games that they'll play are games that involve killing, like games with their friends, and that this is the education that is essentially being put into them, and that the Christian upbringing that they're being educated with talks about their psalms and sings them in their prayers, but they don't talk about the crimes against, he says, God's children, which means the animals, and of the pestilence and criminality and brutality involved in slaughterhouses, and that the children who are committing these slaughterhouse crimes, it is no surprise that Chicago has such a high rate of murder, and it still does today. There's still many slaughterhouses in Chicago, and there's still also, it is one of the most murderous, I think maybe even the most murderous city in America. It's really no surprise when you look at the connection. Oh, there's other reasons as well for Chicago having such a high murder rate, but it's no surprise. One of the leading evidence for someone to become a murderer is that they murder animals. That's well known in criminology. And I was recently reading an article, and I'll link it in the references, but it shows that slaughterhouse workers also suffer higher rates of not only injury from brutal work and long hours without much work safety, and they work very quickly, but also they suffer from higher rates of mental issues such as depression, suicide, etc. And this is because this is your body's reaction to doing something that you know is wrong deep down. You may not know it consciously, but deep down they know this is wrong, and they continue to do it, so their mind is punishing them for continuing to do an immoral behavior, and so the consequences are depression, suicide, etc. I think Charles Lederbeater beautifully concludes with this, so I'm going to read what he said in his pamphlet. I'll have it linked in the references. It's on the highly recommended, so you'll see it at the top of the reference list. And it's called Vegetarian and the Occult, and it's made by Charles Lederbeater, but this is the concluding paragraphs. titled The Better Time to Come. We might all be freed from it very soon if men and women would only think, for the average man is not after all a brute, but means to be kind if he only knew how. He does not think. He goes on from day to day and does not realize he is taking part all the time in an awful crime. But facts are facts, and there is no escape from them. Everyone is participating of this abomination, is helping to make this appalling thing a possibility, undoubtedly shares the responsibility for it. You know that this is so, and you can see what a terrible thing it is, but people will say, what can we do to improve matters? We are only tiny units in this mighty mass of humanity. It is only by units rising above the rest and becoming more civilized that we shall finally arrive at a higher civilization of the race as a whole. There is a golden age to come, not only for man, but for the lower kingdoms, a time when humanity will realize its duty to its younger brothers, not to destroy them, but to help them and train them, so it may receive from them not terror and hatred, but love and devotion, friendship, and reasonable cooperation. A time will come when all the forces of nature shall be intelligently working together towards the final end, not with constant suspicion and hostility, but with universal recognition of the brotherhood which is ours, because we are all children of the same Almighty Father. Let us at least make this experiment. Let us free ourselves from complicity in these awful crimes. Let us set out to try, each in our own small circle, to bring nearer the bright time of peace and love which is the dream and the earnest desire of every true-hearted and thinking man. At least we ought to surely be willing to do so small a thing as to help the world onward towards that glorious future. We ought to make ourselves pure, our thoughts, our actions, as well as our food, so that by example, as well as by precept, we may all be doing that is in us lies, to spread the gospel of love and compassion, to put an end to the reign of brutality and terror, and to bring near the dawn of the great kingdom of righteousness and love, that when the will of our Father shall be done upon earth as it is in heaven. So that will conclude the section for plant-based lifestyle and spirituality, and now we will get into the justifications for a meat-based lifestyle, or Carnism as it's often been called. And these are false justifications. Just to let everyone know, these are not true justifications. There is no justification to do violence against animals ever, or anyone. So these are all false justifications. And when I mean violence, I mean to aggress force on someone. You always have the right to self-defense. I have to make that part clear. The first justification I'll be going over is what I like to call free-range / humane slaughter, backyard chickens, and animal welfare justification. It's irrelevant if the animals are caged, tortured, or fed improper foods. It's essentially irrelevant anyways when they're used in the agricultural industry, because they will be murdered at the end of their lives, and that makes the practice immoral. That's essentially the reason why this is not a true justification, a righteous justification. The thing about backyard chickens is that you're establishing an exploitive relationship with the animals, and you have to understand that a lot of the chickens that people buy from breeders are not natural chickens. They lay up to, just naturally 10 times more eggs than they're supposed to, which is a painful process, is similar to pregnancy, or a very high amount of pain. And if you are taking eggs from the animal, they will produce more eggs than they're naturally supposed to, because essentially their body goes into overdrive and tries to produce more eggs, because they are basically a predator or something. The egg is getting destroyed, so they have to make more in order for their species to survive and their family to survive. So what you're essentially doing is what a predator would do, and destroying and taking away the eggs, and it makes them have to suffer more because they're having to produce more eggs, and each time they're producing eggs, it harms them, and it's too much for them oftentimes. Free-range farms are hardly free-range, as people may think that they're open pastures with just maybe, light fencing. But reality, it's essentially a bunch of chickens are put into a giant cage with very little light, oftentimes overcrowded conditions. And it's really not free range at all. It's not free at all, and it's not a range really. It's extremely crowded in unsanitary conditions, mainly because of the overcrowding. And they can legally be called free range because in order for it to be free range, it simply means that they have to not be in a cage, which it can be a big cage. It can be up to, I think, 100 chickens per 1,000 square meters. If you see the videos, and I have links to what a free range chicken farm looks like, and you can look at it and it's completely unbelievable, and is so different from what people are led to believe from the free range packaging and the pictures on the egg boxes and anything of that sort. So legally, a chicken can only be given 1 square foot of space, which is about the size of a chicken, period, and that is legal. So essentially, if you were to stand up straight with your arms to your side, that's how much room you would have. So that's how free range they really are. They're not free at all. And they're essentially in a giant cage instead of many smaller independent cages. The hens are genetically modified to lay up to 300 eggs every year, but a normal chicken out in the wild will only lay 17 eggs every year. So that's another thing to consider. They're being genetically modified to lay more eggs than their body pretty much can even handle, and it causes them great pain each time. With these labels like organic, free range, and corn-fed, with these labels, they don't help the animals anyways. What they do is they make people buy the products thinking that they're making a good decision and that they actually care for the animals, and to ease their conscience, so they think they're not doing harm against the animals, unlike the conventional regular eggs, but they're doing essentially just as much harm. And all of these chickens will be murdered anyways for their meat because they can make money and profit off of it. So that part is immoral, and no matter what the conditions that animals are raised in, they'll always be murdered for profit. So it doesn't matter how humane it is, and there's no such thing as humane slaughter. And, we wouldn't say it's moral to take the life of a dog if they're given a larger cage or if they're labeled free range. We would say that the life of a dog for food is immoral and wrong, and it should be abolished. People won't do this for animals such as pigs and chickens, which are capable of feeling just as much emotion as dogs. It makes literally no sense because people have been indoctrinated to see certain foods as pets and others as commodities and as meat or food or for clothing, etc. How can the slaughter of billions of innocent beings ever be considered loving, humane, concerning, empathetic? And no matter what religious practice you do, if it's halal or if it's kosher, it doesn't matter. It's still moral no matter what your religious text says. And I'm sure whatever your God that you believe in, it would not matter which one you believed in, because everyone claims that they worship a loving God who cares for all beings. He or she, whatever, created all beings, and that they love all beings, and then you proceed to kill or support the killing and enslavement of beings that God created and that He loves for. That makes no sense anyways from a religious perspective, and it's just immoral anyways, period. It's facts. There's no such thing as happy and humane slaughter or happy meat. There's no such thing as happy or humane rape or slavery or murder. Heinrich Himmler, the Gestapo commander who created the Holocaust gas chamber system, fainted when he saw 100 Jews being shot to death in his honor. Himmler ordered that the means of execution to use poison gas in chambers disguised as shower rooms because he could not stand the so-called inhumane killings of innocent people in front of him through brutal methods such as shooting. So he wanted to see them with less brutal methods such as gassing, but it's still immoral. Reduction and abolishing this practice is the only way to end this massacre. Welfare regulations are essentially useless, and all they ever really do is let the carnage continue. And this is because there's just not a compassionate way to enslave and kill billions of animals who are innocent. Any successful activists in history didn't fight for things their situation to simply just be improved. They wanted to completely revolutionize the system or abolish it altogether. For example, Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King, they didn't fight for better treatment of blacks via improved segregation policies. They wanted to abolish it, period. Just as the American revolutionaries, they didn't want to simply change British law of the colonies. They wanted to be completely independent and to live under their own system. And that is why these two movements were successful. And the same is true for any movement, and this is also true for the animal movement as well. You have to ask yourself, would you think it would be humane to let what happens to animals happen to you? Would you like to be humanely murdered, or your family, or those who care about you? Does that even make sense? Humanely murdered? Humanely slaughtered? Would you like your family to be, you or your family or your friends to be humanely slaughtered? Humanely raised, which is really a euphemism or another term to make it sound less ridiculous and horrific. Would you like that to happen to you as well? How would you feel about that? How could you humanely take the life of an animal? The word humane literally means having or showing compassion or benevolence. How does that fit slaughter or raising, which is really another word for enslavement of animals? Can you benevolently or compassionately murder somebody, an animal, your friends, your family? Can you benevolently murder? No, it makes no sense. It's an oxymoron. It's the literal opposite. People will assume that animals are being treated humanely and that there's laws on the books to prevent cruelty, but people are surprised when there are. And if you see footage, you can obviously see that they essentially don't do anything, because even if they were laws on the books, they aren't enforced, and they would just be ignored anyways by the meat companies and their animal industries. And if you see the footages, the widespread footage, it's not just anecdotal. It's pretty obvious that it doesn't matter whatever you write down on a piece of paper. We need drastic change, and we need education more than anything else. We really want to change this for the long term anyways. You gotta think, do we have manuals and regulations on how to humanely rape or compassionately kill somebody or kidnap them or rob them or enslave them? No, because it makes no sense. But when it comes over animals and killing them and enslaving them, we create massive amount of regulations so people can feel good and think that the animals are being treated well because there's laws, but like I said, they're not enforced, or the meat industries will find ways around them. And that's all that it does, is make people in society feel good, and they feel like the animals enjoy being killed and enslaved and being on the menu is essentially what they think. They think that they enjoy being eaten. They do not enjoy being eaten at all, and their reaction to pain and how they act in slaughterhouse is absolute, definitive, 100% proof of this. One of the reasons that there are terms like organic, antibiotic, cage-free, free-range, hormone-free, antibiotic-free, etc. One of the reasons that the meat industries will say this also is to get people to feel a sense of ease when they eat and buy animal products, and ultimately not to get them to look at what really goes on in slaughterhouses, because if they did, they'd stop buying their products, and that would be the end of them. And their reign of terror will be over soon anyways, because people are becoming more aware, thankfully, and I'm trying to help bring about that change as well. The next argument is the natural order, or the Darwinism, or the food chain, survival of the fittest argument, and evolutionary theory. It is probably the number one most used justification for continuing to use and consume animal products and to hunt, etc. The fact that carnivorous animals kill and eat other animals does not mean that we should, and nor does it mean that it is healthy for us to do it, or if we are intended to by God or nature or the universe. And in fact, I'll go on later that we are actually 100% strict herbivores, and that means that we cannot properly process meat. We may be able to, but not properly, and we will suffer grave consequences if we do so. There's also the philosophy of might makes right. They will argue that because we see stronger animals capturing, killing, and preying upon weaker animals, and that humans have the ability to dominate all other species, that we are morally entitled, or we have the right to prey upon weaker animal species as well. This philosophy could also be argued that a 200-pound man can subdue and forcibly rape a 100-pound woman, and that it makes him morally entitled or righteous to do so. And if sheer physical strength were the only thing necessary to grant more permission to have way with the weakest member of society, then we all would be morally licensed to do hideously cruel behaviors towards us, such as rape and murder, slavery, etc., as long as the person was stronger. So you also have to imagine it from your perspective too. Would someone else have the right to murder you if they were stronger than you, or enslave you if they were stronger than you? No. Some will argue because of our great intelligence as a species that we have the moral license to eat animals, because they believe that we're not actually natural herbivores, because we used our superior intelligence to craft tools, weapons, cooking instruments, and tools that we can overcome our physical shortcomings and the issues that we have with eating meat, so we can process it and now make it better. But as I'll prove in later parts of this podcast, even if you cook it, even if you, or doing certain process to the meat, it's still just as unhealthy. I mean, it's not just as healthy, like raw meat is obviously worse for you than cooked meat, but it's still unhealthy and not meant for consumption. You have to consider that in some countries, children are often notoriously and heinously exploited as tools for deadly explosive to be discharged in suicide bombing. Their limited but rapidly developed intelligence of children can be easily manipulated in this way and provides no assurance whatsoever that turning them into ticking time bombs is morally acceptable. The purpose of this capacity to create tools and weapons is more likely a advanced defense mechanism in order to defend ourselves from predators trying to kill us, and that many herbivores actually have ways to defend themselves against predators, such as a zebra can kick lions or hippos who can bite tigers. The intent is defense and not to kill and then eat them, or to eat and then kill them by eating. These animals do not have anything biological in them to suggest that they are meat eaters, but they do have the means to defend themselves. And this is why our intelligence is one of the main reasons why we are considered by Dr. Milton Mills to be an invincible herbivore. Our species is able to populate the entirety of the earth and to be very prosperous overall because of our superior intelligence. But our biology does not suggest that this was to dominate and eat to survive. This was to defend ourselves. These people who argue might makes right often think that there's a connection between being able to do something, and then because you have the ability to do something, then you have the moral permission to do it. But there's no logical connection to that. Because you have the ability to say, kill a baby, does not mean that you would have the ethical right to do so. Also, this practice of animal exploitation and animal agriculture is completely unnatural as well. The genetic breeding of a species and making them be very fat is not found in wild animals. Wild animals are essentially never obese, and almost all factory farmed are on ranches, etc., are overweight. And one of the reasons also is because they're overfed, but this does not happen in nature because overfeeding is extremely difficult for an animal to do in the wild because it is not artificially given food, and they actually have to find food, and that consumes energy, and there simply is not that much food in the wild to become overweight or obese. And animals do not eat other animals for a living or to profit. They do not select certain tissues of the animals to eat or certain body parts. They do not wash them, trim them, or wrap them in packages to conceal blood or to make it appear in certain ways that is unnatural. They do not cook it. They do not cut it, slice it, grind it, tenderize it, pulverize it, etc. They do this with their own teeth and claws, and they do not do this with tools. And they don't flavor it with sauces, pickles, seasoning, marinades, etc. that masks the odor and smell of death and corruption. Some people say that what wild animals do to other animals is horrific and worse than factory farming, which might be true. However, this is debatable as well because when wild animals are killed by a predator, it's usually quick and over fast, but animals are enslaved for many years under constant, continual oppression and in fear and in pain for many years, oftentimes. But it's over in just a matter of usually a few minutes when a wild animal takes down another wild animal. And we have to ask, but aren't we more evolved than the simple barbarity of animals that are carnivorous and capable of higher reasoning? And we do not need meat to survive, unlike carnivores. So we are herbivores, and we don't have the justification of we need to eat meat either. And then some species will eat and rape their own kind, but would we be justifying cannibalizing and raping others of our own species? No, we would not. Nor would we have the right to do that to other species as well. Another justification is the food chain justification. Food chains are important for ecological balance and to maintain natural population sizes of wild animals. What we do is not like a food chain. We breed them, and you don't see this with non-human animals. I'll just refer to animals at this point from this point on. We forcefully impregnate them. We take their babies away. We mutilate them. We exploit them for their milk and eggs. No animal consumes the milk and eggs and animal products of other animals intentionally. Sometimes, like, a bear will eat some bees. They actually eat bees, not the honey, and they'll eat some of the honey, but it's not intentional. They don't go round them up into slaughterhouses, cut their throats, and hang them. And it's nothing like the natural world, and it has nothing to do with maintaining healthy population sizes. And the proof of this is that the animal industries has absolutely destroyed the environment versus the natural order of ecosystems and wild animals of having carnivores and herbivores, and the ratios creates a very sustainable ecology. And the carnivores essentially help prevent the herbivores from consuming too much plant matter, so they will eat them and they will kill them in order to prevent a lack of plants in the long term anyways. And if there were too many carnivores, then there would be a shortage of herbivores and the carnivores would starve out. So as you can see, you need to have a decent population ratio of herbivores and carnivores. Otherwise, an ecological system will collapse, and that is essentially what is going on. The overpopulation issue and the lack of resources is not too much of a human issue as it is an animal issue, and too much food is going to animals, and too many medicines and too many energy resources such as oil are being used for animal exploitation, and too much electricity. All of this could be used to help improve humanity and other human beings instead of being used in completely wasteful purposes only for profit in the animal industries. That could instead be used to help feed and to help bring clean water to those who need it, and housing, etc., which is necessary unlike animal agriculture and exploitation. If you truly believe you're on top of the food chain and that we're naturally top of the food chain, then go to a mountainous area where you find some lions and just be naked and have nothing on you at all, no weapons, traps, etc. Lie down and see what happens. And then as these animals are eating at you and trying to kill you, you'll understand the ridiculous idea or notion that the strong should be allowed to prey upon the weak. Again, you always have to look at it from if it would happen to you. That's really how you understand moral law and natural law. And an experiment you can try if you believe we're naturally carnivorous, then you can try hunting without any tools, and you'll find out quickly that almost any animal will be able to outrun you, or they'll be able to fight back against you, or they'll hide from you. And like say if you took a pig and you're trying to attack it, it'll probably take forever and may even be impossible to kill a pig, even if it simply just let you attack it with no weapons. And let's say that you did kill it, then you would have to eat all of its organs, its defecation, its brain, sexual organs, its blood, everything. Killing during a one-on-one confrontation without weapons and the ability to consume bloody, raw, possibly even diseased flesh from the bone, and possibly even the bone itself as well, without having causes diseases and issues related to health, are the only two factors that determine physiology and the placement in the food chain. And because of this, we're essentially on the bottom of the food chain, really, despite having the fact of effective means of defending ourselves. We are capable of herbivores and we're capable of defending stuff, but we're not on top of the food chain. Natural law only applies to human beings. It does not apply to animals which have less cognitive abilities and capacities of understanding morals and natural law, and it does not apply to animals because they don't have the brain capacity and the ability to understand the difference between right and wrong. Natural law doesn't apply to animals except that we should not eat animals and to do violence against them and harm them and to exploit them and enslave them, etc. Darwinism is the idea that animal standards for behavior should also be applied to humans as well. And what this leads to, and what this has led to in the past, is this idea of social Darwinism. And it's the idea that the most ruthless amongst society should rule over and should exploit and control and even murder those who are less ruthless or intelligent or strong. And what social Darwinism is essentially the history of humanity, really. Unfortunately, you have the most psychopathic, most intelligent, and these are not true holistically intelligent people. These are intellectual people, not people who have heart-based intelligence. This is essentially what humankind has been for most of its history, and especially the social Darwinist justification was used in the conquest of Africa by European powers. That's where it became popular, and that was shortly after Darwin created his theories and made them public. Then you could also use this justification, well, if the rules of the animal kingdom apply to human kingdom, well, some animals eat each other of the same species, so then I guess we would have the right to do that as well, since, they eat other animals. Let's say more advanced aliens were to come to Earth and they had the means to completely murder us, enslave us, and to kill us for meat. And the person who believes that because we're more advanced being we have, and an alien who believes that because they're more advanced beings and they should have the right to murder and eat them. And the people who believe that, well, I guess they should be the first ones on the alien plate to go willingly, because since they believe it so much, then you should be happy to go ahead and just sacrifice yourself to the aliens. And you shouldn't try to resist them, I guess, then, because you would have no moral issue. And then the same could be said for an intelligent person, a severely mentally disabled person, that they would have the right to murder and enslave them just because they were less intelligent. And intellectual superiority does not grant more rights or moral superiority. Evolutionary progress is not achieved by being the most vicious being. It is the being who has the ability to adapt to their environment, which is what Darwin actually himself said. He never said the ability to survive and to thrive was based on the ability to be as vicious and bloodthirsty and brutal as possible, but the ability to adapt to their environment. And being the most vicious as possible has so many counterintuitive aspects to it. And the reason that we evolved so much is not because we did massive amounts of animal agriculture, enslaved and tortured and killed and ate billions of animals. It's because of, as I will get into later on, but I'm going to explain briefly here, it is from eating raw fruits and vegetables from the wild. That is what ultimately made us human and changed our brains and made them to what they are. Specifically eating lots of fruits, versus the more leafy-based vegetables that apes ate, and also possibly even psychedelic foods such as mushrooms out in the wild may have also caused our brain to act in strange ways and to become more intelligent apes, essentially. Although the theory of evolution is very debatable, so I'll have to say that. And there's some interesting theories of evolution, and maybe we came from another extraterrestrial species, and etc. So you have to take this evolutionary part with a grain of salt. But even if we did come from an alien species, we were not the same species today as we were then in those times. Even if aliens were to come here at some point in early human history, such as the Sumerians and the Egyptians account for involvement in creating humans, we still evolved from that state into a more advanced being later on in the modern age. As I mentioned before in the law of correspondence, the universe is going to respond with what we give it. So if we enslave and murder and destroy animals, then the same will happen to us. Maybe not in the short term, but in the long term it will. And maybe not even in this lifetime. And the universe is going to reflect that action back to us. And also this is a Darwinian notion of natural order, not the true natural order. This is because people bought the idea of Darwinism and the natural order, which is really just a belief system, and is not really what's going to create true order or peace on this earth. The only thing it creates is destruction. And there's a difference between human nature and the human condition. This is not natural for us to do so because we've been doing it for a time, or certain cultures have done it. There's a difference between nature and condition. We've been conditioned, but our actual true nature as beings, when we arrive on this earth, is to be completely herbivorous and to just absolutely hate any cruelty to be done to animals. The only reason we think different is because we've been indoctrinated. You'll never see a baby or a person who grew up in an isolated community of people who had a plant-exclusive lifestyle, such as in a tribe or some small community that's isolated from the rest of the world. You'll never see that child start to want to torture or kill or murder animals. And the chaos that is going around in the world is proof that we need to change our actions and that we're doing something very unnatural. Because if we did what was natural for us and what is good for us, then we would not see all this chaos, and we would not see things such as wars and poverty and starvation if we aligned ourselves with natural law and the true natural order. And if we align ourselves with natural law, it will create order and peace. Even though this is our condition, it does not have to be this way, and we are capable of changing our condition. It is the poison world to think that we can never change, and that things have always been this way and always must be this way. That is not the truth, and it is a false worldview. And if you are in the state of consciousness, you've essentially given up all hope, and you believe that there's no point in changing, and the world will essentially just always be chaotic if people hold this worldview that change is impossible and there's no hope. You can see the recent increase in people adopting a plant-based lifestyle increasing, and more people are stopping consuming animal products than you see in stores now. An increase of plant-based alternatives to meat, such as Beyond Meat burgers and other veggie burgers, and alternatives to chicken and alternatives to milk, such as soy milk, almond milk, rice milk, etc. The might makes right philosophy is the basis of all totalitarian regimes and warlords and warmongers, such as Mongolians to the Nazis to the Soviets, the Romans. All of them were based on the might makes right philosophy, and all that it has ever lead to is war, chaos, slavery, suffering, and impoverishment. And anyone with a true historical understanding of human history understands this, and I'll be going over I always go over history in my podcast a little bit, but if you have an understanding of history and you really read through it, you'll start to understand that this is absolutely true. Sadly, this is because evil people have been in the majority, or people who are complicit with evil have been in the majority and had the power to brainwash the masses with the might makes right mentality and convince the majority to also mock up for anyone who stands up for the victims and defends the inherent right of all beings to live freely and to be treated fairly and with peace. Most people will say that it's natural to eat animal products and that justifies doing it. But first of all, most people have many unnatural items such as technology, computers, TVs, cars, clothes, refrigerators, other appliances, running water, and it's filtered. And 99% of pregnant women in the Western world give birth in a hospital rather than just doing it by natural methods of just letting the baby come out. And most people constantly are washing and cleaning themselves with soap, when all animals will naturally lick themselves, remove dirt or grime, and they just don't clean at all. And many people who just use this justification also use dozens of toxic chemicals to clean their homes and offices. And animals don't use anything to clean their environments, or they don't clean at all. And people wear glasses and do things such as take pills, but animals don't correct their eyesight if they have eye issues with glasses, and nor do they take vitamins or pills to maintain health. And why do meat, dairy, and egg eaters cook and clean the products they consume when natural carnivores and omnivores do not cook or clean food that they eat? Carnists aren't completely irrational when humans are the victim. They only embrace logical behavior when animals are being discriminated against because they're addicted and obsessed with meat, eggs, dairy, honey, etc. And when it comes to Owen's one addiction, addicts are always the most insane, illogical, and excuse-filled people ever. Ever known an alcoholic or someone who is addicted to drugs to be rational or ethical when it comes to alcohol, cigarettes, or addictive drugs? No, they cannot be rational or ethical. Meat and dairy and eggs eater when it comes to animal issues and whether humans should be enslaved and murdering animals because they're addicted and obsessed, or they like the pleasure of it, so they will be blinded by that, and they cannot be rational or ethical about making decisions of eating animals or using them to create products. Contrary to Darwinism and religious dogma, animals do not belong to us. They're not commodities, and they're not property, and they're not stupid inanimate objects who think and can't feel, or are machines. It's outdated and 100% insane to believe that. People can understand that animals use their eyes to see, nose to smell, and mouth to eat, legs to walk, etc. But people never think about that they use their brains to think, be rational, to feel. Are we supposed to believe that every body part in an animal functions just like it's supposed to, except for the brain, which is responsible for emotions, notably as well, which means they would feel pain? The same mindset of might makes right and money is more important than morals is the same mindset that justified slavery in many countries, because the majority of people concluded that economic gains were more important than the slavery and the suffering of those who were enslaved. But we've moved on from that mindset. Most of the world has, at least from chattel slavery, hardcore slavery. And now we believe that freedom and justice and peace are more important than slavery and are justified, unlike slavery, and no amount of economic gains that have been gained from slavery justifies the evils of slavery. And since slavery is slavery and cruelty is cruelty, even if the victims have animal features or non-human animals, they still deserve to be liberated from cruelty and deserve to be free, not enslaved or killed or murdered. Some will argue that the Native Americans and their way of eating and consuming animal products and harvesting them, etc., was moral because they had a harmonious relationship with nature and their methods were natural and helped the environment, in fact, and did not destroy the environment like animal agriculture and industrial factory farming. However, eating animal products is not in our nature and it is not harmonious, so this justification cannot be used. How come when one person dies is a tragedy, but when billion animals are killed intentionally, it's a celebration? And people always view murder as wrong as well. But every time a bear kills the hiker, people don't praise the hiker for being part of the circle of life. They don't say he wasn't fit enough to survive. People say that he was murdered. We will try to get a bunch of people to try to hunt the bear for killing the hiker. But it's interesting that the circle of life never comes into play when it's us being killed and us humans. And that's because the circle of life is just a justification that is arbitrary and false, and it is an excuse to torment and kill and murder. The circle of life is also not always true. Carnivores don't always kill or try to kill prey, even if they are vulnerable. And there's an example of this in some of the references for animal intelligence. But, for example, a leopard protected a baby, which is a completely vulnerable individual animal, that it preys upon, and it chose not to kill. Instead, it actually chose to protect it. So either way, omnivores, herbivores, carnivores all have the choice to refuse to kill their prey or refuse to kill an animal that they have the ability to dominate over. So there is really ultimately no excuse, even from the perspective of carnivores and other animals. This concludes the natural order justification. The next justification is possibly the second biggest, although possibly the first biggest actually, and that is false religious justifications. And is the idea that God gave us dominion over these animals, so we have the right to use them as we please and to do violence upon them. People were living a plant-based lifestyle long before religions and also during the foundation of almost all the major religions today, such as Buddhists, Hindus, Adventists, Jains, etc. All these religions have forms of and origins in not consuming animal products. And a also example for Christianity is the Garden of Eden, which Adam and Eve only ate fruits. In the three major religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the commandment, thou shalt not murder commandment, and it is murder, it is not kill if you actually read the original translations. This commandment means that it is actually violation of the 10 most high commandments of the Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So that means that if you follow one of these religions and you murder an animal, or if you support it, then that means that you are violating this commandment. In the Christian Gospel of Nazarenes, Jesus says, wherefore those who would want to be my disciples, keep your hands from bloodshed, and let no flesh meat enter your mouths, for the Lord is just and bountiful, who ordains that man shall live by the fruits and the seeds of the earth alone. He also states, verily I say unto you, for this and I have come into the world that I may put away all blood offerings and the eating of the flesh of the beasts and the birds that are slain by men. And the beginning of the Creator gave all the fruits of the trees and the seeds of the earth and the herbs for food. But those who loved themselves more than the Lord or their fellows corrupted their ways and brought diseases into their body and filled the earth with lust and violence. I should just note, I can't go over every single religion and passages and verses where they explain that eating a plant-based diet is the only morally justifiable diet, but you can find it if you look for it online. But I'm going to go over the major religions. Muhammad states in the Quran, Allah will not be affectionate to a man who is not affectionate to Allah's creature. Whoever is kind to the creatures of Allah is kind to himself. A good deed done to an animal is as good as doing good to a human being, while an act of cruelty to an animal is as bad as an act of cruelty to a human being. Countless religions talk about love, compassion, and showing kindness and empathy. However, killing animals and murdering them and doing violence to them is not empathetic, kind, or compassionate to them. Instead, people give into their selfish desires and motives to kill animals and use them and commodify them for their own desires and motives. Another thing is people seem to worship more the books that were written by men, by the way, instead of God's creations and respecting his creations, or, whatever religious viewpoint you take, if you take any. And, do you think that there are slaughterhouses in heaven or in paradise or in the Garden of Eden? They were just murdering animals. I mean, it was called the Garden of Eden for a reason. They only seem to worship things that were created in God's name, but not actually created by him himself. Charles W. Letterbeater said this. He said, and then there is a far more important unselfish side of the question, that of man's duty towards nature. Every religion has taught that man should always put himself on the side of the will of God in the world, on the side of good against evil, of evolution against retrogression, which is the opposite of evolution. The man who ranges himself on the side of evolution realizes the weakness of destroying life, for he knows that just as in here in this physical body, in order that he may learn the lessons of this plane, so is that the animal occupying his body for the same reason, that though he may gain experience at his lower stage, he knows that the life behind the animal is the divine life, that all life in the world is divine. The animals therefore are truly our brothers, even though they may be our younger brothers, and we can have no sort of right to take their life for the gratification of our perverted taste, no right to cause them untold agony and suffering merely to satisfy our degraded and detestable lusts. The next justification is the necessary or the survival justification, that, in other words, that we need meat to survive or to maintain proper nutrition. And I'll be going over why this is false. First of all, most of us live in an industrialized society that we do not need to eat meat nor survive. The reason that humanity began to eat meat for the most part is because of catastrophic events, and because of such as the Ice Age wiped out a lot of the vegetation, and we had to turn to animals to survive, otherwise we would have died. So 99% of the people on this planet live in an area where they can cultivate crops and they do not need to eat meat. And as a matter of fact, it'd be more economical and better for their environment to do so. This temporary survival technique has actually become a habit tradition because of, people's lust for meat, and also the pleasure that they receive from it, and the fact that people just didn't stop because it became such a habit during the Ice Age that it continued through the rest of human history, essentially. Even during a survival situation, however, since even if you had the only option of eating animals to survive, those animals had to eat a plant, or an animal that ate another animal that ate a plant to survive. So if you go to the source of the plants, then you actually probably would have a better chance of surviving than eating the meat. So even during a survival situation, that might not even be a justification, because there could be other options. However, in a survival situation, I would not see a moral issue with eating animals to survive, in my personal opinion. But most people are not living in a survival situation where they would need to eat meat. Most people live in parts of the earth that can grow plenty of crops that are nutritious and can sustain them, and even are more healthy than meat, much more healthy. Plant-based diet is nutritionally adequate, healthy, and safe for all stages of life, including pregnancy. Animals that share about 90% of our DNA, such as gorillas, apes, and other primates, are strictly herbivore, and they have plenty of protein, and they are fit, and they are strong and thrive on this diet. So we could do the same, as we are very similar, although not completely similar. That 2% does change things a bit, obviously, but diet-wise and our atomical structure is very similar. Many of the world's best athletes also eat a plant-based diet, and I will link some into the references section, which also shows that you can be very physically strong and fit. Possibly many of the best athletes eat only a plant-based diet and do better than their meat-eating and omnivore counterparts. So this proves that not only is it optimal, but we don't need it to survive. Eating meat can also cause things such as heart disease, most forms of cancer, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, strokes, and kidney failure. The necessary argument was actually created by the meat industry, and well, at least partially, in order to not lose any profits, and also to stifle the growing movement towards plant-based diets, etc. Although this argument has existed for a long time, the meat industry helps facilitate this argument into the masses using media. And I'll get more into the dangers of eating animal protein, how we are strict herbivores, in the section that correspond with the food, and the dangers of eating food such as meat and animal protein and animal products in the following sections, in the herbivore versus carnivore section. The next justification is the tradition/culture, or the normal justification. This justification often comes from the indoctrination people received as a child to grow up thinking they need animal products such as meat and milk, such as the idea that you need meat to get protein, or that you need to drink cow's milk to get strong bones, but not, a dog's milk, chimpanzee, elephant, rhino, hippo, tiger, but specifically cows. No, that doesn't make any sense, because the only milk you ever need is your mother's milk, and it was designed for you. A cow's milk is made for a cow, just like a rhino's made for a rhino, dog's made for a dog, and no other animal species does this. And it's absurd to drink the milk of any other species anyways. And there is so much evidence to show that milk is absolutely terrible for you as well. But moving on from that, people would see something such as dog fighting as morally atrocious. However, many dogs are used for that specific purpose. Does that make it acceptable? No. But dog fighting is legal in most Western countries, or most people who are listening to this in their countries. However, it's perfectly legal in countries such as China. And so, because something is morally accepted in a culture, does it make it right? No, it does not. Could you say that female genital mutilation is a morally acceptable practice in the countries where it's legally allowed or morally acceptable? Is it justified to kill dogs and to use for meat in certain countries as well? Is it justified to kill dolphins in Japan or in the Faroe Islands? Is a moral practice just because it's cultural and traditional? In the video Food Matrix at 2:54, the presenter demonstrates how traditions are formed, and he shows them two circles, and one's blue and one's red, and he says that the two circles are not equal, and then he asks the crowd which circle they think is larger, and then he later tells them that they're actually equal because they look equal, and that's what people were thinking. But because the presenter implanted into their mind that circles were not equal, they saw them as differently than they actually were, and that their instincts told them. Well, it's the same way with manipulating children, for example, and telling them that meat is food and that we have the right to kill certain animals for meat and to use them in industries and commodify them. So just imagine if you're a child and you were taught that one of the circles was larger than the other ones. And if you say it enough times, you'll convince yourself that it's the truth. And if you're told loud enough, then it becomes essentially the truth. Although it's not really the truth, it becomes accepted as truth. And if people are taught that a certain circle is larger than the other one, then it becomes part of the culture, and then the culture passes it down to the next generation, and now it's a tradition. Tradition and morality is not the same. Like some cultures, slavery is essentially still legal, and people find it hard to question eating meat when society has told them all their life that it's okay to eat meat. And so why would they ever question the so-called conventional wisdom? And it's not conventional wisdom. Most people are wrong about almost everything, really, that they've been taught or what they think they know. So there's really no such thing essentially as conventional wisdom. You have to find out the truth for yourself, because there's been so much indoctrination and propaganda in society, and we've been indoctrinated so much. We have to find out the truth for ourselves. Even if there was no indoctrination in society, which that is not the case, we would still need to find things out for ourselves and read and consider different points of views and different sources of information. That always needs to be done no matter what. And that's what I try to do here as well. We'll also use the argument of tradition will also live in homes with air conditioning, electricity, plumbing that has helped improve our standards of living. Well, going to a plant-based diet would also improve our standards of living, and we no longer live in caves and stuff like that. So just because we have been doing it doesn't mean we need to continue, and doesn't mean that it's good for us either, because it's been a tradition. Our lives have been drastically improved by these things for the most part, and we need to evolve and go to our next stage of evolution. And one way to do that is to adopt a plant-based lifestyle. Our ancestors did not really eat an insane amount of meat or a large amount of meat, because it requires far more energy to hunt than it does to forage, and it provides the same or often better nutrients. We don't have any instinctive ability to hunt besides the usage of our mind technology, such as trap, spears, and archery to hunt. We don't have claws, we don't have fast running speeds, night vision, talons, paws, beaks, sharp canines, etc. that predators use to hunt. Traditions are not worth upholding just because they're tradition or it's a cultural habit, which is essentially what a tradition is. The only time a tradition is worth keeping is if it is beneficial for the individual or for society. Many habits, traditions, customs are good ones. Some are harmless and some are evil. Whether they're good, evil, or neutral, they didn't become morally acceptable or morally false because they're embraced without question by people. They were always good, evil, or neutral to begin with. Traditions, customs, habits are hard to break, but evil, harmful, and bad habits need to be broken. Evil traditions can be eradicated, such as slavery in America or other traditions that are evil. Rational minds can overcome the falseness and immoralities of many traditions, habits, and customs that can turn innocent beings into victims without reason or mercy. Again, you have to place yourself in the animal's perspective and see yourself as a confined artificial world where you deny your freedoms and you have no chance of living a long, healthy life of freedom and denied sunlight and basic necessities for the most part. Then imagine yourself on a concentration camp truck, terrified and confused on your way to slaughterhouse so that someone could slice up your throat and cut you to pieces or exploit you and commodify you in other ways. If you try to assume the animal's point of view honestly, you understand why the insane addictions and psychotic addictions of meat and cheese, milk and eggs, and other animal products must be abolished. If you eat animals and the things that come out of animals, you're causing pain and suffering, polluting yourself with the blood of innocent beings. Good people are people who maintain good habits and worthwhile tradition and customs. They don't just talk about it, they practice it. They don't just pray about love, they actually give it. It is not your right, because it's your tradition, your custom, or your habit, to deny animals their freedom so you can harm them, enslave them, and kill them. That's not what rights are about. That's injustice. There's no counter-argument to it. Accept it and apologize for the way you've been living. You can make amends, move forward, and change your actions to the better. Part of culture, in addition, is to see certain animals as pets and others as commodities. A lot of people see eating dogs as disgusting. However, in other cultures, eating dogs is more acceptable as eating pigs. Why would it be wrong to eat certain animals and not others? There's simply an arbitrary distinction. It's the story that we've been told from very young. It's part of a false cultural tradition. If you take someone from any place in the world, such as Asia, Africa, South America, North America, Europe, we're all the same species. We're all human beings. If you take a young child from any country and you put them in front of a pig, dog, cow, cat, or a chicken, they're not going to eat any of them. Which one are they more likely to pet? They're going to pet all of them because we have no natural instinct to eat meat at all. The only reason we believe this is because we've been taught this. Because our diet is a learned behavior. It is our instinct to not eat meat. If you saw someone hitting a dog, what would you do? You would take action at the very least, or be upset. Every animal on Earth is an earthling, and human beings, we're all earthlings. And earthlings have two things in common. We all want to live, and we have the desire to live, and the second thing is we avoid pain. These two things make us equal to the largest animal on Earth, the elephant, to the smallest insect, ants. Now, if you just walk outside right now and you saw someone hitting a pig, would your emotional response be the exact same thing? Of course, because the question for you is, what's the difference? What's the difference between the two? Is there even a difference? You might think one is cuter than the other, but that says more about you than it does about these animals. As a matter of fact, dogs and pigs feel essentially the same amount of pain. Maybe pigs might even feel more pain and have greater sense of emotional intelligence than dogs, or even small children up to the age of 3. They both ultimately feel pain either way. Yet every time we sit down for a meal, we create a separation. We believe that they're not equal. It's just like how we can say that two circles of the same size and different colors are different sizes when they're actually the same. All it takes is someone to tell you a story and to change your perspective. Part of it is also cultural tradition, and people don't want to be different from everyone. This is part of mind control, and this is a primal fear as well, that we don't want to be going against the herd or the crowd. We don't want to stand out and do what's right, because standing out takes courage, and most people don't have any courage, really. It takes also more than courage, it takes effort as well, and most people don't want to make the effort to change their habits, because as longer a habit builds up, the more difficult it is to break, so most people also have that issue as well. I also have to warn you, if you're trying to adopt a plant-based lifestyle because it's a trend or if it's become more popular, then I would say that's probably not a good enough reason, because what if it is no longer a trend to adopt a plant-based lifestyle? And as a matter of fact, really, it's still way more popular and trendy to eat meat, but there is an increasing trend towards a plant-based lifestyle and refusing to eat meat and buy products with animals that were used to make them. But what if the trend changes? Then would you change? Probably. So you need to adopt the core reason that anyone should have a plant-based lifestyle should always be the morality first, because morality never changes. If we found out that eating meat was maybe more healthy or some weird way, it still wouldn't change the fact that it is immoral. Morality never changes, which is why it should always be the most important reason that we decide to go a plant-based lifestyle. Just because a practice has been going on for a long time does not make it a just practice. Time or the number of people who practice the tradition does not make it more moral or even less moral as well. The only thing morals care for if it's right or wrong in the moment. at an individual level. That's what you have to consider morality, such as interaction between two people. This is the argument that that's just the way we are. We just eat meat. That's just how we are instinctually. There's no such thing as what we are, because we are what we choose to be. We have to understand and contemplate about what we are and who we've become. There's no set way things have to be. We can consciously choose to make something different and be something better than we are. That's what evolution is all about. The willful, conscious choice to be something better than you are and were in the moment before. So we are simply what we choose to be. We're capable of consciously evolving past what we have been by active of our will. That's our choice, no one else's. The only thing that's not within our will to choose is the laws of morality. What's right and wrong. We cannot choose what right is or wrong is. It's immutable, which means it cannot be changed, and it's eternal. It's like saying, I don't like stars, and I want them to be something else, or I want the sun to be something different than what it is. It's a part of nature. You're not going to change that. Well, at least not anytime soon, right? I mean, maybe if we get certain technology, but like a law of gravity, it's a better example. You're never going to change that. The next section is personal choice / it's my freedom justification. When it comes to personal choice and freedom, a few in the world understand the truth about freedom more than I do. And I think I can honestly say that. However, saying that, the so-called freedom of choice to kill, enslave, and voluntarily fund animal exploitation is an illusion of free choice. Do the animals get the free choice to live? No, you have taken that right, so therefore you do not have a personal choice to do that, because you're violating the personal choice of an animal, the instinctive personal choice of an animal to decide that they want to not feel pain and to live. Remember how I said that those were the two common desires of all animals. You could also argue that it is someone's personal choice if they wish to commit rape or do an act of murder, because the person personally chooses to do so. But does that make it morally justifiable? Did the murderer or the rapist ask for the permission and gave the person they murdered or raped a choice? No, they did not. So it is not the choice really of, and it's not freedom, because freedom is freedom from violence, as I said, and you have to consider freedom of choice for both parties or both individuals. You cannot coerce or use violence because you're violating the persons to make an actual choice, nor can you lie because you're violating the persons to make, or other parties to make, a personal choice that is informed. Are you expecting the environment, everyone who's affected by changes in the environment and the climate because of animal agriculture? Are we expecting their choice to be free from environmental pollutants? And it's the worst reason for climate change besides perhaps sunspot changes or natural climate change. It is the worst environmental effect on the climate, global climate change, is in animal agriculture. People can get very defensive when you tell them what to eat or how to live their life. They will often argue, I respect your choice to live a plant-based lifestyle and I respect my right not to be. But when your right infringes on your supposed right to live a carnistic lifestyle, infringes on the rights of other beings, whose rights take priority? The person who is respecting the rights of all beings is the one that takes priority. You cannot be an environmentalist and live a non-plant-based lifestyle. It's beyond personal choice when you're doing violence to others. The earth cannot sustain the way we eat, and I'll get into this later. It's a fact, and it's approaching a point that is unsustainable, and it could eventually lead to complete societal collapse of the entire earth, essentially, and catastrophic events such as mass plagues and dead sea zones, a lack of oxygen, etc. It is not simply our personal choices either, because every action we do has a butterfly and domino effect. In other words, our actions have consequences that are far beyond even our understanding and go far beyond just what we bought at the store, for example. And as I mentioned before, environment effects is one of them. So even small changes can have large effects because of the domino effect. As one small change happens, it affects another event that is a medium-sized event, for example. And then that medium-sized event, because it was affected by that small change, becomes a large event. So even small events, such as what you buy at a grocery store or a clothing store, can affect society on a drastic level. There's also supply and demand as well. Each time you buy an animal product, there's an increased demand for that animal product as well. So that means that because of the increased demand, the industry has to increase their production of the animal products. So you're helping the industry increase their torture, enslavement, and murder of animals. It's not like you're breaking some ethical code. Most people have respect for animals or even love animals deeply. So by going into a plant-based lifestyle or diet, you're still respecting your ethics. Imagine if somebody asked if it was their personal choice to throw some plastic in the river and pollute the river, or to dump pesticides or oil and other toxic chemicals into the river. You have to consider that as well. There's also the societal healthcare impact cost. This directly affects many people because most countries have a healthcare system such as Medicare or Medicaid programs or government-funded health programs. So everyone's being forced to pay for these healthcare programs. So by adopting a less healthy lifestyle, you are making others have to pay more in taxes in order to fund your bad habits. In some ways, indirectly making people have to pay more taxes, which is another issue as well. Now, I don't think these programs should exist in the first place because you should not be using violence and force to make people pay for healthcare that is immoral for the same reasons as forcing an animal to be used for slavery. It's another part of the non-aggression principle as well. But you have to consider that it is the reality right now that government-funded healthcare is a thing, and that it's a burden on society, especially when people do not take care of their health, such as by eating meat. You have to remember that animals don't willfully surrender themselves or allow themselves to be killed. They will run away, they will try to fight back. So they do not consent to being killed in exploitation. They will oftentimes refuse to try to get out of the trucks, so they have to be beat into areas. They always have to be beaten at least early on in order to go to certain areas of the slaughterhouse or animal or the ranch. Though eventually they accept their slavery because they understand that they don't really have a choice. So that's why you see sometimes they will follow their master even without being beat. They are just simply forced against their will, and their personal choice has been removed from them. To consider which rights are more valid, the right to eat dairy or a mother's cow's right to not have her child torn from her at a young age and sent to slaughter. It's important that we begin to live as though we're interconnected with each other, the animals and the planet, because that's the truth, and we simply are. Choices for what goes inside our body affects more than just yourself or ourselves. The choice to do violence to other animals simply cannot be respected because it does not respect the rights of other animals. And no one should tolerate this as well. No one should tolerate the violence being done to any animal for any reason. The next justification is the I'm just one person justification. However, one person can make a huge difference in it. And one person always does make a difference. Maybe not always a huge difference, but we all make a difference at an individual level. Figures such as Jesus, Nikola Tesla, Gandhi have drastically changed the course of human history due to their actions. Also, you may not even be aware how much your actions affect the world because, as I mentioned before, the domino and butterfly effect. However, you will if you research how animal agriculture is done and how your money affects it. You may also not be aware of the domino effect of your actions of continuing funding the meat industry as well and other animal agricultural industries. The thing we need to understand more is supply and demand. The reason that a business is supplied is because there's demand and we pay for the products that a business sells, which allows them to continue to exist and to increase their business operations and increase their production. And if we don't pay these businesses for their products, the business fails. The reason that this happens to animals is because people decide to go and pay for the animal products. So if we kill the demand, then you kill the supply and the production. When, for example, buy a steak, the cow has already died. You paid because you demanded that it dies. These are some interesting facts about the process of supply and demand of animal agricultural industries. Between 2007 and 2014 in the U.S., 400 million fewer animals were killed in 2014 than 2007. Because less people are deciding to buy animal products, which means less animals are being killed. So when you don't buy a steak, you're essentially saving a cow's life. And by adopting a plant-based lifestyle, you're saving an average of 20 animal lives a year at least, possibly more if you consider that, well, in order to make a steak, you need to kill one cow. And it has a profound effect when you change your lifestyle. You go to a market now, you'll see soy milk, almond milk, coconut milk, rice milk, hazelnut milk, and other things such as fake meats, etc. This is because of the increased demand of alternatives to meat-based products, and these things did not exist, or not to the extent that they did 10 years ago. And it exists because people are buying alternatives to animal products such as rice milk and not buying cow's milk. This is not to say that all it takes is one person to change the world, or that you should not try to influence others to go to a plant-based lifestyle because all you need to do is change yourself. This is simply not true at all. It will be a far easier process, and the more people that we get on board to adopting a plant-based lifestyle, the more it'll be easier for those who think more like the crowd or the group and who have been more thoroughly indoctrinated by culture to change their lifestyle. But you need to worry at an individual level first. And you need to ask yourself, what are my actions contributing? Am I being part of the dynamic of suffering? You can also become a powerful force for influence others to become a plant-based lifestyle if you adopt it as well, as I explained in a later section. You can also lead by example by adopting a plant-based lifestyle, and others will notice the positive effect it had on you, and others can follow in your footsteps, such as your increased health, more empathetic, and other benefits as I have described before and will describe more in the coming sections. Next section is you can't be 100% plant-based and live a plant-based lifestyle, so there is no point. Here's an analogy. A fireman runs into a burning building with our 2 trapped children. He realizes due to circumstances beyond his control he can only save one. Is it better to save one child or none? When you eat animal products and buy them, you're intentionally purchasing a product that you know has a victim who has suffered. When someone who adopts a plant-based lifestyle buys plant products, there is not an intentional victim that's suffered. Here's another analogy. Say you drove down a road and a dog runs out in front of you. You accidentally hit the dog. You cannot be held morally culpable for the action because it wasn't your fault. It was unintentional. Or at the very least, you will not suffer the same moral consequences as if you intentionally did it. Natural law still applies either way. The idea that you cannot adopt a 100% plant-based lifestyle because some animals are accidentally killed in the production of plants does not justify intentionally purchasing animal products which have guaranteed victims, because animal products absolutely always require victims that are animals and that also feel pain. It can take up to 16 kilograms of plants to produce 1 kilogram of certain animal products, which means that more insects and small mammals like mice are killed in production of a meat eater's diet than plant-based diets. So if you truly care about animal according to crop production, you should adopt a plant-based lifestyle anyways, because if you do so, you're minimizing the amount of casualties that are involved in crop production. That's what adopting a plant-based lifestyle is all about ultimately, is by reducing suffering, because eliminating suffering in the world is very difficult, if not impossible, because of the limitations of technology and agricultural methods. However, we should always try to improve our technology and agricultural methods to reduce suffering to animals, even including insects and small mammals. Some carnists and people who consume and buy animal products will argue that because of obscure small amounts of animal products being found in certain things such as cars, tires, that since no one in the world can completely avoid using traces of animals, then we can murder every single animal and we can use them and dominate all animals and we can use them however we wish. This is simply a logical fallacy. And also, tires are not required to make with stearates, and which are derived from animal fat. It is not required to make tires. Again, people also will drive cars which kill millions of people a year accidentally by crashes, and yet they still drive cars. So just because some animals might be killed in plant agriculture does not make plant agriculture immoral. Just as driving in a car is not immoral just because you might accidentally run into somebody and hurt them. The next section is convenience. Convenience is another argument, and people argue that there's not enough plant-based options for restaurants or foods. You have to ask yourself first, what's more important, life or convenience? There's plenty of plant-based alternatives to chicken, honey, milk, turkey, pork, beef, bacon, cheese. If you can think of it, they're all alternatives. Good news now is that almost every grocery store in America, and probably even in the Western world, has alternatives that are not far off on what you would want in the real thing. And if you have a hard time finding a good alternative for the real thing, you can try different products. There's usually many different options if you go searching around for finding that true meat taste. I've heard people say that certain meat products taste no different than alternatives to meat, so you cannot use the taste argument either. The inconvenience that we go through from swapping from what we buy to something different is nothing compared to the suffering that an animal must endure for its entire lifetime, oftentimes, and its brutal murder at the end of its life. It does not compare. The next justification is taste, pleasure, and addiction. So we have to ask ourselves, our taste buds are worth more than the life of an animal. That doesn't even cover it all, however. Is our taste buds worth more than the life of the planet? As I mentioned before, the environmental destruction is potentially catastrophic. In other words, is it worth more than the life of every single living being on this planet? What sort of future do you want to leave for your children and grandchildren and others' future generations? Do you want to leave them a world that is environmentally clean and allows for prosperity, a world that is desolate and on the decay and on the brink of extinction, or possibly actual extinction, and the world to become essentially a giant wasteland? The United Nations has stated that to avoid the worst effects of climate change, the world needs to shift to a plant-based lifestyle. The United Nations is not a plant-based lifestyle organization. Is the United Nations making a honest comment to people? So if you not change the way you live, even if it's just a simple change, we will be the ones who feel the consequences, and the generation will also feel the consequences of the actions we take today. And that's not to say that the United Nations is a holy organization or that it is perfect, because the United Nations also does some pretty horrific things, but you have to consider, you just have to do the research on each individual study. The United Nations is a very large organization, and like many organizations, there are good people and bad people in those organizations and who also contribute to them. People say, I can never give up my meat, it's just too tasty. People just want to feed their animal instincts that have been bred into them and they've been indoctrinated into. They don't want to try and to work with those desires and to transmute them or transform them into something better, which most people will never grow out of spiritually enough to learn how to do. It's not an instant thing, and it's a process. You don't have to go or need to go into a plant-based diet in a day. You need to be honest with yourself and then have a goal and a destination and then slowly work to and achieve it. And it's not just about progressing either. You need to actually achieve it as well. So you need to make progress as often and as frequently as possible and to not stop until you adopt a completely plant-based lifestyle. The truth is, the reason most people like meat is because of spices and seasoning on it that is also cooked with it and simmered with it. It is not meat that people like really as much as the plants that are added to the meat that make it taste so good to most people. Most people would not eat meat that has been cooked without seasoning or spices or without batters and oils. Even fewer people would eat it raw. This is because it tastes disgusting according to 99% of people, and there would be no business in meat if there was no sauces or seasonings, spices, and oils added to it and if it was not cooked. The great thing is, by adopting a plant-based lifestyle, you don't have to give up any of the taste that you love. Like I said, most people like the spices, sauces, oils, etc. that are added to meat. You can use those same things on beans, for example, and it has the same taste as the meat, essentially. And or you can eat all of what is added to meat dishes, such as the sauces itself, and use it in say rice, for example, in order to make the dish feel less dry. And you can also use them on the plant-based alternatives for these meats as well. People also add lots of vegetables such as onions, tomatoes, pickles, lettuce, avocados, and mushrooms, and also do things such as put them between two slices of bread to make the dish more appealing. And you'll notice a lot of these meat dishes are almost half plant-based, and that's really ultimately what people like about them, is the plant part of the vegetable of the meat dish that makes it so tasty. So you can just directly eat these instead of eating it with meat, because the meat is not the part that you actually like, more than likely. When we eat a meal, it lasts for about 15 minutes, and that's usually how long we'll think of it while we're eating it. But death for an animal is eternal. Every single one of these animals is killed for our taste preferences. It is an individual that feels fear and that feels pain and wants to live just as we all do. We don't have the right to take life from them because we enjoy how they taste. It is a poor excuse for doing so and slaughtering them. We must put ourselves in the position, and we have the ability to feel pain, the ability to feel fear, and the inherent preference to live. And this applies not only to us, but also to animals that we eat and kill. We need to put ourselves in that position for a moment to understand why taking their life can never be morally justified. What if we were in that position of an animal in a slaughterhouse? Would it be more justifiable to have someone take our life for someone else's sensory pleasure pleasure. It is not acceptable. A meal is something that lasts a matter of minutes, and we soon forget about it as soon as it's finished. But remember that meal has cost an animal's entire life of existence. We take away life for minutes of pleasure, and what right do we have to do that? Not just as a species, but also as individuals. People say meat just tastes too good and that I'm too addicted. But what you're really saying is I can never develop the willpower to change who I am, and I am complicit in the practice of violence or violence by proxy by funding the animal industry. Many people eat meat also say that they get a tingly feeling inside and they have a feeling of euphoria beyond just simply taste. And they say this is what it feels like to be alive or fed, or this makes me feel vitalized. No, this is not true though. This is what it feels like to be addict and getting your fix, because you're not willfully strong enough to overcome an addiction to a moral practice. The next section is the economy, or what about the farmers section. Another argument is that farms which rely on dairy, egg, and meat would go broke because there's no demand. Because if the world went to a plant-based lifestyle, then they would have to shut down and they would be without employment or without a source of income. However, it would not be difficult for these farms to transfer meat. They already produce crops for their cattle, chicken, etc. Even if it didn't, the reality is you have to suffer the consequences of your actions. If you do immoral actions, people, you might have to suffer poor economic circumstances, and I wouldn't really feel sorry for you, to be honest, because if you're doing violence to others, then if you have consequences from doing those violence actions, I would not really feel sorry, because you are the one responsible for murdering, torturing, and enslaving animals, especially because it's unnecessary to farm and kill animals for survival as well. There are plenty of jobs out there for other people and other industries to get into as well. There isn't even real proof that if our entire society went to a plant-based lifestyle, that would damage the economy anyways. People who live on a plant-based diet don't just live off the air. They eat fruits, vegetables, and other plant-based products that are grown by farmers in America, packaged by factory workers, and shipped to groceries and restaurants by truckers. We dine at restaurants where our chefs cook the food, waiter serve it, and dishwasher scrub the plate. We buy shirts, pants, shoes, jackets, cars, bikes, airplane tickets, listen to music, watch TVs, use computers, etc. Plant-based lifestyles are just as beneficial to the economy as meat, dairy, and egg eaters. We simply want an ethical economy and transfer the economy to a more ethical economy that doesn't intentionally harm animals. Farmers who enslave and kill animals could easily transfer their land back to its original purpose, the harvesting of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains, and legumes. In a capitalist society, consumers dictate how businesses operate, and from the products corporation produce to those items grocery stores sell. If you want hot dogs, pigs will suffer and die. If you want soy dogs, no one gets killed. The 10 billion land animals enslaved and killed every year in America would not simply be running through the streets when everyone adopts a plant-based lifestyle. The meat and animal product industries artificially impregnate hundreds of millions of land animals to create 10 billion animals to sell to 300 million meat-eating Americans. Since the principles of supply and demand are always at play, the animal agriculture industry will become unprofitable once people stop buying and eating animal products. And each meat eater is responsible for the deaths of 3,000 land animals and 5,000 to 6,000 marine animals throughout their lifetime. So by adopting a plant-based lifestyle, we'll actually have less overpopulation issues with animals, and there'll be less animals overall on the earth because we won't be artificially increasing their numbers in order to satisfy our desires for meat and other animal products. Farmers will only breed animals into existence if they can sell them. They're not going to breed them if they can't sell them because that's not economically viable. So the shift to a plant-based lifestyle will be gradual naturally. And so the number of people who adopt a plant-based lifestyle increases. The animals being brought into existence will decrease as well proportionally. And then if we get a plant-based world, then farmers are not bringing the animals into existence anymore. So we'll never have to face the dilemma of having to release billions of animals into the wild or take them to slaughterhouses. It would simply be gradual and a very natural process. The next section is pets are different from livestock, but I'm an animal lover justification. Some will get so angry and upset at the idea of a dog being abused, but laugh or get angry and upset at those who would be angered by a pig or a cow or chicken being killed. Some would say that rescuing dogs from a dog festival where dogs are killed is heroic by almost all, and especially animal lovers. However, why it's not the same for animal liberation activists who go and rescue cows, pigs, and such. These animals are alive and they have the ability to show compassion, receive compassion, and can feel pain. And what gives us the right? What gives us the right to arbitrarily point a finger to decide who lives and who dies? It gives us the right to inflict pain, suffering, and death upon those that wishes to avoid pain, suffering, and death. We do not have that right. People argue that you can love animals and eat them. It's something that people will hear all the time. People will say, but how can you live in a society of animal lovers, and that same society also pays for and perpetuates a system that slaughters 56 billion land animals and up to 2.7 trillion marine animals every single year? These are animals that feel pain and want to live. And it's impossible to love animals if you pay for them to be murdered and killed, even if it's different animals than the ones you have as pets. Let's put it into a human perspective. If a parent was to beat their child, will we say that that parent loved their child? If a partner beats the other half, will we say that they love their behalf? No, because you can't love someone if you inflict intentional suffering and pain on them. This also applies to animals. What if somebody was to be an abusive dog? We would not call them a dog lover. If somebody was to slaughter a cat by cutting the throat, we would consider them to be a cat lover. So you cannot be a animal lover if you intentionally pay for or kill animals yourselves. To be a true animal lover, you need to show respect for all animals, not just the one that society indoctrinates you to love. If you love animals, you should adopt a plant-based lifestyle because you are helping to end animal suffering, which is truly loving and caring for animals, possibly more than anything else. The next justification is the separation worldview justification, which is the idea that animals aren't conscious in the same way we are, so it's okay to kill them and use them for whatever means we want to. However, as one being suffer, all beings suffer, and we are all universally connected on the same field of consciousness. In other words, if one being suffer, we all suffer. And that includes human beings and animals as well, any living sentient being. If they suffer, you suffer as well. If others are suffering, we should want to alleviate that suffering in order to alleviate suffering for ourselves as well. The next section is industry, and this is industries, and this section is an introduction actually to other sections that goes over the various industries that produce animal products. 98% of the animals who are abused and killed on this planet are abused and killed by the industries of animal products, including meat, dairy, eggs, industries, and more other industries, as I will get into. Not by natural disasters, deforestation is because of the animal industry, or mining, or building infrastructure, etc. So the main source of suffering for animals on this planet is because of the animal agricultural industry. This section is the dairy/milk, butter, beef, cheese, and yogurt section. And combining these sections because they're so closely related, one of the biggest reasons plant-based lifestyles fail is cheese. And it's number one reason that people don't adopt a plant-based lifestyle, and it's one of the reasons why people fail so often, because they say they can never give up cheese, or pizza, for example, especially pizza. One of the reasons why cheese is so hard to give up is that it literally has opioids in it called casomorphine. And casein in cheese is 10 times more concentrated as milk, since essentially cheese is hardened and concentrated milk. Casomorphine is believed by Neil Barnard that casomorphine is actually 10 times more potent as pure morphine. These opioids keep calves from coming back for more and more like crack addicts. This is why people are so addicted to cheese, and why industries such as cheese, milk, and other dairy products are so profitable. It's because they're essentially have people hooked on a drug. Studies show that rats on casomorphine act similar to when they're on morphine. So if you're addicted to cheese, then you need to adopt a plant-based lifestyle instead of going halfway and just stopping eating meat. In order for a cow to produce a significant amount of milk each year, they need to be pregnant and give birth every year. From the point of giving birth peaks at about a month and a half, and then slowly declines about 9% per month until they reach 10 months, where milk production goes so low that's worth just giving them a 2-month break. But they do not want to give them a 2-month break. Most dairy farm cows are sent to slaughter just after 5 years, and they live up to 20 as their natural lifespan. They also want to kill them early, not only because they don't produce so much milk, which means they're just taking up more space essentially. However, they have to kill them because they will keep producing more and more calves, and they won't have enough room in the slaughterhouse for all of them, or the pastures. So ultimately, all dairy cows are killed shortly after they're born, essentially only when they're a fourth of their way through their lives. 97% of calves are forcibly removed from their mothers within the first 24 hours of life as well. And male calves, since they are not milked, they're often killed sooner as well, since they are no use in the dairy industry. They're essentially just killed for their veal and their meat and beef. According to Florida researcher Robert Cade, and his colleagues identified casomorphine as only found in cow's milk, a possible cause of ADD and autism. It was found in high concentration in the blood or urine patients with either schizophrenia or autism. 80% of protein in cow's milk is casein, and is broken into a morphine-like substance. It can also increase the symptoms of autism and ADHD. People are concerned about estrogen from, for example, soy, but cow's milk has twice the amount of estrogen that's found in soy, and is much more harmful type of estrogen as well. Phytoestrogens are the estrogens found in soy, and those are actually good for you, and they're not the same as regular estrogens. It should also be noted that men and women both need estrogens, and the only healthy way to get estrogen through the body is to eat it through plants. And you cannot get too much estrogen from plants. This is why you don't see people from China and Japan that eat a lot of soy have fertility issues or see extremely feminine men, because it is animal estrogens that drives the body crazy, and that can turn you into a woman, essentially, is what it does. Cows do not make milk for us. They ultimately make milk for their calves, just like female humans make milk for children. This can only be done shortly after pregnancy. They carry their babies for 9 months, and then shortly after they lactate. In other words, they produce milk for a short time. And after weaning, they stop producing milk. So you need to have them constantly impregnated. So in order to constantly impregnate cows, you need to have them always be impregnated. And the dairy industry does this by repeatedly inseminating them, which means they constantly rape them with machines in order to ensure that they always are producing milk. One of the reasons why the calves are taken shortly after birth is that it's so that the calves do not drink the milk from the mothers or attempt to. A male calf is sent to slaughter after only a few weeks old. Because that means even if there was just a dairy industry, there would still be a meat industry. If you still consumed and bought dairy products, you would have the issue of the meat industry, because it would still continue. There would make no sense to have the dairy industry without the meat industry, because male calves are useless, and so the only purpose they serve is to slaughter them. These repeated milkings also lead to frequent infection and sores. Oftentimes as well, there is a entire industry that is involved in the slaughter of pregnant animals to produce what's called a fetal serum, and bovine fetal serum is most widely used. Bovine fetal serum is obtained by cutting a living fetus out of a mother's womb, piercing the heart, and draining the blood. This process can take up to 35 minutes. 35 minutes of torture while the fetal calf remains alive. That's just absolutely unbelievable. The cows have multiple pregnancies, and each time the calf's removed from them, this causes an extreme amount of psychological trauma, possibly an emotional trauma, possibly more than anyone could ever even conceive of. And the physical demands of repeated milkings, which are completely unnatural because they're not supposed to have this many babies, because when the baby's taken away, they have more babies in order to survive, because their bodies essentially tell them they're just in a survival situation, so they need to produce more calves. And because of all these constant milkings that are completely unnatural, and the crowded, unsanitary living conditions leads to infections and sores. Dairy cows are pumped full of antibiotics and growth hormones, which seep into the milk. In fact, there's an official number of pus cells allowed in milk, which is referred to as the somatic cell count. In the United States, around 22 million pus cells allowed per single fluid ounce of milk. But the global allowable limits range from just under 12 million per fluid ounce to 30 million in Brazil. In other words, you can almost guarantee anything you drink with milk or consume with milk is going to have pus in it, which is completely disgusting and definitely not fit for human consumption. Cheese is also very high in sodium, is mixed in with hormones, as I said before, and is one of the highest fat foods, making this extremely unhealthy. There was a study that was done that injecting casomorphine had a pain-killing effect and even delayed learning in mice, which is why it causes certain learning disorders like autism, possibly. Another study found that higher doses can even cause amnesia. Eating milk is also, and drinking milk and milk products is concerning as well, because it may be linked to sudden infant death syndrome, and is possibly because the opiate system is connected to breeding. And it's found that children who died of sudden infant death syndrome had 3 times the levels of casomorphine in their blood. 7 out of the 10 most addictive foods, according to a study done by Ashley Gerhardt, 7 out of 10 were foods that contain dairy products, which is not surprising at all. These foods include foods such as pizza and cheese. Eating a pizza is like taking a low dose of therapeutic morphine, and the high fat content can also make it addictive as well. And these two work together to make it extra addictive. The earliest shown evidence of animal agriculture, specifically milk, is about 6,000 years ago, but it was only mainstream about 3,000 years ago in Western European countries, which is why most people of Western European descent are not lactose intolerant, while the rest of the world is. However, this proves that it is not necessary for our diet to consume milk because only a small portion of the world actually drink milk in the first place. Sugar molecules in milk break into glucose and galactose, or what is sometimes called. Infant mammals can make tons of lactase because they have to be able to absorb the lactose in the mother's milk. However, after this stage ends in this infant's life, they have to wean because they can no longer digest it. And this is why you can no longer digest lactose anymore after a certain stage in your life, unless you have a certain mutation in which you are not lactose intolerant, because about 75% of the world, maybe even 85% or higher, is lactose intolerant. And like I said, Western Europeans are the only people who are not lactose intolerant for the most part. 95% of Asians are lactose intolerant, 74% of Africans, 70 to 73% of Native Americans, 53% of Hispanic Americans, and Caucasian Americans or Western European descent Americans that are lactose intolerant is only about 33%. People often argue that you need to drink milk in order to gain calcium. However, because calcium from milk is poorly absorbed and can actually leach calcium from your bones, as I'll get into later, it is not effective at preventing osteoporosis or hip fractures. As a matter of fact, a Harvard nurses' health study showed that women who consume the most milk had the highest rate of hip fractures. And when you look at worldwide dairy consumption, the countries with the highest amount of dairy consumption have the highest incident of osteoporosis and weak bones. There is no benefit in consuming dairy if your goal is calcium consumption. Whole milk is also very high in saturated fat as well, which in also has proteins that have been linked to a number of cancers as well. They also are high in estrogen growth hormones, which can be a big problem even if you're a woman, if you get too much estrogen, and especially a problem if you're a man. When a baby drinks cow's milk, they have a increased risk of developing type 1 diabetes from the lack of iron deficiency, and the proteins in the milk also increase their risk of developing type 1 diabetes. This is because the body attacks insulin producing cells in the pancreas and kills them, and this process is increased from IGF, which is insulin growth factor, which milk increases the levels of insulin growth factor. Consuming milk can also be a huge problem for those who have asthma because milk increases the production of mucus, and that can exacerbate or exaggerate the effects of asthma and make you more prone to getting respiratory infection and sinuses. It also increases the risk of prostate cancer. And prostate cancer is much more deadly and attacks faster, and more people die from it if they're a non-white race because they are more lactose intolerant or just straight completely lactose intolerant. The China study by Dr. Colin Campbell shows that dairy protein is strongly linked to liver cancer and a number of other problems, including multiple sclerosis and other issues as well. You also might be wondering where you get vitamin D from, but the vitamin D you get from milk does not absorb well. Vitamin D you get from any source does not absorb well. In fact, as the only true source to be able to get vitamin D effectively and absorb it well is from sunlight. The only reason that milk has vitamin D in the first place is because it's fortified with it. And one of the reasons why it's fortified with vitamin D is that so that you absorb the calcium more effectively. Because if milk had no vitamin D, you would not absorb essentially any of the calcium, because getting calcium from milk does not absorb well because it actually leaches calcium from the bones in order to protect against the sulfate that is produced by consuming milk. Generally, if you go outside for about 30 minutes a day, you will be fine in your vitamin D levels, although it depends on your latitude and where you are in the world, like how cloudy it is, etc. However, if you do live in places that are of a higher latitude or a very low latitude, then you may simply have to spend more time outside. You can also get vitamin D through vitamin supplements as well, and is much healthier than getting it through milk, and you should be able to get it at almost any drugstore. Countless studies have shown that when a person drinks a glass of milk, they actually lose more calcium in their urine than they're able to absorb from the glass of milk, which is why those who drink glasses of milk, women who drink glasses of milk, according to Harvard health studies I mentioned before, have higher rates of osteoporosis. So essentially, and you're only going to absorb between 17 to 23% of it anyways, but more will be excreted through your urine than you absorb because your body, like I said before, has to get rid of the acid-forming parts of the milk. A human being's skeleton will weigh about 20 to 25 pounds, and a full set of antlers on a mature bull moose weighs between 80 and 85 pounds, and they only eat plants. So you do not need to get calcium from animal products. As a matter of fact, it is very detrimental for your bone health, contrary to popular belief. Calcium is widely found throughout the plant kingdom, readily available, and comes with a whole bunch of other nutrients that are very beneficial for you as well. They do not have high saturated fat or any at all, or clog calories, and have bad hormones. Many of the largest animals also get calcium from plants as well, and some of the largest ones, such as elephants, rhinos, and cows, are the largest animals on Earth. Calcium helps regulating acid, which is an example why Tums help with heartburns. Yeah, I will say when I drank 3 cups of milk, I got more heartburns, and this is possibly due to the acidic nature of animal proteins, leading to animal foods high in calcium being poorly absorbed because your body has to often buy calcium in order to reduce acidity. You absorb far more calcium from plant foods. For example, Brussels sprouts, you absorb 64% of the calcium, cauliflower 69%, and radishes 75%. Eating plant-based foods high in calcium such as lettuce shows a decreased risk of hip fractures. There is no human requirement for milk, says Susan Havala, RD, author of American Dietetic Association's position paper on vegetarian diets and several books on nutrition. The use of milk and its product in our culture is strictly a cultural condition. There is millions around the world who never consume cow's milk and are none the worse for it. People who avoid dairy products may seem to be choosing an unusual diet by Western standards, but are actually choosing a typical diet by world standards. The belief that milk is necessary in the human diet is clearly incorrect, according to Mark Manissa in his book, The Vegetarian Way. Nutritional anthropologists believe that our earliest ancestors who got their calcium mostly from wild plant foods because they did not have animal agriculture or had no understanding of animal agriculture had higher calcium intake than their milk-drinking contemporaries. Anthropologists also believe that until 10,000 years ago, all humans were lactose intolerant because this was before people started to drink milk and possibly developed that mutation. One of the greatest reasons of calcium loss is because of a high protein diet, specifically animal protein anyways. And this is because animal sources of protein make our urine acidic, and the body attempts to remedy this by drawing calcium, which is an alkaline mineral from the bones. This calcium is lost and flushed from the body's urine. North Americans typically eat twice the recommended amount of protein. And again, this is only true for animal protein. By eliminating animal products together from your diet, you can cut urinary calcium loss in half. And also, plant-based foods have higher absorptions of calcium, and many have even higher amounts of calcium than milk as well. Because milk has excessive protein, it's more of a calcium problem than a solution. Milk is also the most common form of food allergy as well. Investigations have routinely found residue of veterinary pharmaceuticals in milk and other milk products, and some may cause increased cancer risk as well. Robert Curtin says that the main focus of the published report seemed to indicate increased risk of intestinal colic, intestinal irritation, bleeding, anemia, allergic reaction in infants and children, as well as infections such as salmonella. In adults, the problems seem more centered around heart disease and arthritis, allergies, sinuses, and possibly leukemia, lymphoma, and cancer. Any lactating animal that has ingested a toxin will excrete it through breast milk. Hence, toxic metals may be found in high amounts in dairy. This is one of the reasons why autism could possibly be caused by consuming dairy. Pasteurization of milk does not remove the pus out of the milk, which is from, and this pus also is only sanitized with pasteurization, not actually removed. And organic milk actually has more pus than non-organic milk because when cows get infections, as they always do, medicines are used to treat this issue. Thus, more pus accumulates in the milk. Plant-based alternative milks have no pus, however, and we're also the only species to drink another species' milk. And one of the reasons why it was drank is supposedly because in northern European countries could not produce vitamin D enough from the sun, so that they would drink milk in order to make sure they get enough. To go more into the China study, Dr. Colin Campbell did research in 1975 in China, investigated the effects of the primary protein found in dairy, casein, and he had 2 sets of lab rats, one with a diet of 20% casein and the other with 5%. Over the 12-week study, the rats eating a high-protein diet had a greatly increased level of early life-stage cancer tumor growth than the rats of the 5% group, which showed no signs of tumors at all. So he took these further and gave a single group of rats alternating dairy amounts every 3 weeks, switching from 20 to 25% and back and forth. The results were astonishing. and that were given 20% early live tumor growth exploded, while the same were given 5% protein tumor growth actually went down. Dr. Campbell did the study on humans with the China study, and it validated his research. Dr. Campbell also discovered that plant-based protein, such as this, come from soybeans, wheat, even at high levels, do not cause any tumor growth whatsoever in his experiments. The mother of any mammal will provide milk for a short period of time immediately after birth. When the time comes for weaning, the young offspring is introduced to the proper food for that species. A familiar example is that of a puppy. A mother nurses the pup for just a few weeks and then rejects the young animal and teaches it to eat solid food. Nursing is provided in nature only for the very youngest of mammals. It is not possible for animals living in a natural state to continue drinking of milk after weaning. How much milk a cow produces is extremely unnatural. 50 years ago, the average cow produced 2,000 pounds of milk per year. Today, the top producers can produce 50,000 pounds, and this is accomplished by the use of drugs, antibiotics, hormones, force feeding, and specialized breeding. Bovine growth hormone, or BGH, is a genetically engineered drug that it stimulates milk production, but according to Monsanto's, the hormone's manufacturer does not affect milk or meat, although this is simply false. And there's other manufacturers as well, but the Monsanto is the main one. There have been no long-term studies on the hormone's effect on humans who drink milk, and other countries have banned BGH because of safety concerns. One of the problems with adding molecules to a milk cow's body is that the molecules usually come out in the milk. Cow's milk allergen can also be given by mothers to children who are exclusively breastfed. This is because this allergen appears in the mother's milk and is transmitted to the infant. Salmonella, E. coli, and staph infections can be traced to milk as well. This is from bacterial contamination, which is common in milk from dairy industry. Bovine leukemia virus is found in more than 3 of 5 dairy cows in the United States, and this means that a very large percentage of all milk is contaminated, from about 90 to 95%. This virus is killed by pasteurization if done properly. However, if the milk is raw, this is not done properly, or it may be done improperly even if pasteurization is done. In a study of randomly collected raw milk samples, the bovine leukemia virus was recovered from 2/3. And in many countries, they still drink raw milk as well. One milk processing facility in Chicago in 1985 had a cross-connection between raw and pasteurized milk. A violent salmonella outbreak followed, killing 4 and making an estimated 150,000 ill. Even lung cancer has been associated with most ingestion. The habits of 569 lung cancer patients and 569 controls at Roswell Park were studied by the International Journal of Cancer in 1989. People who drink whole milk 3 or more times daily had a 2-fold increase in lung cancer compared to those with never drinking whole milk. Here's an interesting comparison. For the key to the osteoporosis riddle, don't look at calcium, look at protein. Consider the two groups. Eskimos, which have an exceptionally high protein intake, estimated at 25% of total calories. They also have a high calcium intake at 2,500 milligrams a day. The osteoporosis is among the worst in the world. Now, a group that was studied are the Bantus in South Africa. They have a 12% protein diet, which is mostly plants, and only 200 to 350 milligrams a day, about half of average American woman's intake. The women virtually have no osteoporosis despite bearing 6 or more children and nursing them for prolonged periods, and also consume less calcium overall. When African women migrate to the United States, they are more likely to develop osteoporosis, but not quite as much as Caucasian or Asian women, and this is because there's a genetic difference that is modified by diet. All the calcium you get from milk is from what the cow ate. So if you eat what the cow eats, which is plants, then you'll be able to get all the calcium you need. Elephants, rhinos, and horses have massive bones, and they only eat green leafy vegetables. These provide a high amount of calcium, and these animals have much larger bones than us and much stronger. So if they're able to get it from leafy greens, then we should be able to as well, especially since we're both herbivores. Most people on this earth get plenty of calcium without drinking milk. Most people on the earth do not actually drink milk, and some of the countries with the lowest rates of osteoporosis do not consume any or very little milk. An interesting fact is that 70% of antibiotics in the United States are used to feed farm animals, and then people eat these farm animals, and then they wonder why antibiotics don't work in the hospital after they get an infection. And a lot of these infections are actually from the animal products as well, and from things such as milk. As I mentioned before, the infections from the machines that milk them get into the milk, and then the pasteurization process may not kill them, and then people consume the milk and it has infections inside of it. The next section is the chicken and egg section, and I'll link these together because they're so closely related as well. Eggs are actually extremely unhealthy. They're very high in cholesterol, and this is not the good cholesterol. This is LDL cholesterol, and it's not the cholesterol that your body naturally produces, and your body actually produces all the cholesterol that you need. So it is not an essential nutrient. You do not need to eat anything to get cholesterol. An egg is an unfertilized egg that is part of the menstruation cycle, and essentially it is the period of a hen. It also goes through the same hole that they defecate in. A meta-analysis of 1/3 people noted that those who ate the most eggs compared to those who ate the least eggs had increased risk of cardiovascular disease as well as stroke. Chickens have been bred from where they normally lay 10 eggs a year to where they lay 250 eggs a year. This is over the process of thousands of years from people being obsessed with eating eggs, and they wanted to make sure that specifically selectively breed chickens that produce more eggs than they're naturally supposed to produce. Laying an egg for a chicken is roughly equivalent to a human giving birth in terms of the mother and the birthing object, or what is known as a baby. They also experience the pain as well. Because of the desire to increase profits, hens give out prematurely from the extreme demands of production. Hens lose vital nutrients every time they form an egg because they cannot produce an egg out of nothing. They have to get it from nutrients inside their body. Every aspect of their life is regulated to ensure maximum output. They control the laying cycles with days of persistent light followed by complete darkness, starving them for weeks at a time, effort to force another egg cycle from their worn out bodies. And this is referred to as induced molting. And this manipulates them also genetically so that they can have chickens who produce more eggs. We have chickens that are bred just for the meat and just for the eggs. This is separate from the dairy industry. Because of this, the egg industry produces millions, if not billions, of unwanted male baby chicks every year. Since male chicks can't lay eggs, they are of no use and they are disposed of, where they painfully are gassed, slowly suffocated, ground up alive, and other awful methods. Hens live short lives in cramped cages, unable to even extend their wings oftentimes. Free range and cage-free facilities, as they're called, though they're not accurate, only bring comfort to those who buy them. Cage-free birds are crammed into tiny sheds and have twice the mortality rates of battery cage hens. Battery cage is the standard caging practice where the cages are essentially as large as the chicken. Of the 10 billion land animals that are killed in America, 9 billion are chickens. 340 million of them are hens in the egg industry. Factory farms stuff anywhere between 20,000 and 8,000 birds in each warehouse, and after just 6 to 7 weeks of living feces and urine, and in cramped conditions, oftentimes with injuries from overcrowded conditions and with infectious diseases, they're killed, soaked in a chlorine bath to remove slime and odor from their carcasses, and shipped to the grocery store. In a documentary, Unhappy Day, the owner of a California chicken facility, when chickens have finished 2 years of laying, the third year they don't lay enough eggs to pay for their feed, so they have to go. And they go to a slaughterhouse where they process for stewing chickens. Female chicks also have a portion of their beaks cut off while they're fully conscious to prevent them from pecking at each other in overcrowded environments. This is to prevent injury of hens because injured hens are inefficient egg layers. All eggs are covered in feces and urine because the same hole that chickens urinate and defecate from is the same hole that they lay eggs from. In 1994, an undercover investigation by Wall Street Journal writer Tony Horowitz described treacherous work conditions and low wages of the horrors inside a chicken slaughterhouse. He was employed in several poultry slaughterhouses and described the work as faster than ever before, subject to Orwellian control and electronic surveillance, reduced to limited tasks that are numbingly repetitive, potentially crippling, and stripped of any meaningful skill or chance to develop them. The work often was so fast-paced that it took on a zany chaos. He recalled, with arms and boxes and poultry flying in every direction. At break times I would find fat globules and bloods speckling my glasses, bits of chicken caught in my collar, water and slime soaking my feet and ankles, and nicks covering my wrists. Because of the increased demand of poultry, which is like chicken and turkeys, restaurants and supermarkets need more slaughterhouse jobs and workers. And this has also increased abuse in more and more workers, according to the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union. Currently, more than 80% of slaughterhouse jobs are held mostly by minorities and minorities between 18 and 25 age, making $5 or $6 an hour. Shockingly, for many of them, working on the poultry line represents the best or only point available. It takes about 660 gallons of water to produce a pound of chicken, including the skin and bones. With the same water, farmers could produce 16 pounds of broccoli, enough soybeans for 3 pounds of tofu, or enough grain for nearly 5 pounds of whole wheat bread. Overall, U.S. poultry operations use 96.5 billion gallons of water annually, enough water to meet all the yearly domestic needs of nearly 4.5 million North Americans. It takes roughly 6 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of chicken. It takes the equivalent of 1/5 a gallon of gasoline to produce a pound of chicken. That's 8 times as much fossil fuels that is used to produce the same amount of protein from tofu. And tofu is actually a more processed food anyways, so if it was a more raw vegetable such as broccoli, it would be even far less. For every pound of meat produced, we lose about 5 pounds of topsoil, and growing the soybeans, corn, and other grains used as feed. One large chicken complex produces 125 tons of manure each day, and this is also dumped into rivers as well and can cause airborne pollutions and diseases as well if not properly sanitized. And there's simply not enough room for this as well. According to a 1994 report by the University of California, environmental contaminants from factory farms can include excrement, production water, storm, water runoff, dead animals, dust, silage, bedding, contaminated products, medicines, and chemicals. In just the state of Arkansas, chickens generate as much waste as 8 million people, which is more than triple Arkansas's human population. In 1992, Washington Post discovered that the state's 5 northwestern counties where the chicken industry is centered, nearly half the region's 600 miles of streams are polluted so much with chicken and livestock waste that they're off limits to swimming. Fecal coliform bacteria and nitrates from the manure have contaminated virtually every water stream of the once pristine trout-filled White River, threatening the drinking water of 300,000 people. Up to 25% of slaughtered chickens on the inspection line are covered with feces, according to reports by CAP inspector and other meat inspectors. Shipment of meat as large as 25,000 pounds are contaminated with everything from black grease and metal shards to digestive contents and dead insects. In one case, the inspector retained 14,000 pounds of chicken speckled with metal flecks and 5,000 pounds of rancid chicken necks and 721 pounds of green chickens that made employees gag from the smell. So this would be a total of 19,721 pounds out of 25,000 pounds are essentially contaminated. Animals that are dead or diseased are slaughtered anyways and end up to supermarkets. The GAT report also did testimony on the filth in chicken slaughterhouses. Mixtures accumulate in coolers, walls, floors, equipment, including human and animal excrement, chicken parts, blood, oil, grease, glass, plastic, wood chips, rust, paint, cement, dust, insecticides, and road droppings. Free-range eggs are no better, really. Simply increase the size of the cage, but they have up to 9 birds per square meter, and do not require to have sunlight. Broiler chickens, which are used for meat, are killed normally about 6 weeks, but hens that are raised for eggs are lying for 72 weeks. This means that they actually suffer more, although of course it is immoral to cause suffering to any animal for any duration and for any reason. In the U.S. alone, contaminated chicken kills at least 1,000 people and sickens between 6.5 and 80 million others. These astronomical figures should be noted that these are actually underrepresented to the extent that they are actually a problem because of the difficulty of reporting and identifying foodborne related illnesses. Handling chicken has gotten so precarious that Time magazine has called raw chickens one of the most dangerous items in the American house. Even government officials recommend treating poultry as if related with lethal microbes, because they are. A recent report summarizing 55 different studies found that approximately 30% of chickens is contaminated with salmonella and 62% with its cousin Campylobacter. These two pathogens are responsible for 80% of illnesses, 75% of deaths associated with meat consumption, says the USDA. Today's slaughterhouses are used and factory farms are responsible for 90% of meat production and chicken production, egg production. They do an excellent job of dispersing pathogens from bird to bird because of chilling tanks, communal rinses from chicken carcasses that are filled with water that routinely becomes a insect brood known as in the industry as fecal soup. According to former USDA microbiologist Gerald Kunster, the product that emerges from these tanks ends up in the supermarket shelves and is no different than if you stick it in the toilet and ate it. This next section is on bone broth, which is sort of related to the previous section, but it's more of a debunking section. It should be noted that bone broth has almost no calcium, and you have to drink 11 cups of bone broth to get your daily requirement of calcium. It's so that a study shows if you add vegetables to your bone broth, you increase the calcium level by 7 times the amount. If bone broth is actually good for your health, it would have a significant amount of calcium. Another claim people say is that it helps skin, joints, and bones. This is a simplified view of nutrition because they believe bone broth collagen will make you look younger because it goes straight to your skin. This is sort of the idea that if you eat a part of an animal, it will fix the part that you ate, such as if you ate an eyeball of an animal, then you get better eyesight. But this is not how actual nutrition works. Plants offer actually richer sources of collagen, and eating diet rich in leafy green vegetables is ideal if you're looking for some anti-aging effects, antioxidants, and they are good sources of calcium as well. The next claim is that bone broth cures cold. The study goes back to the study on chicken soup and cold. Science says soup lowered inflammation markers that would help with cold, but how is this possible when chicken is one of the most highest sources of pancreatic acid, which is bad for inflammation? Well, it's because in the study it wasn't actually chicken, it was onions, potatoes, parsnips, sweet potatoes, turnips, carrots, celery stems, and parsley. All of these are anti-inflammatory foods that counteract the effects of the chicken. Vegetable broth, it would have even greater anti-inflammatory effects. Another study shows that cooking chicken in your kitchen allows multiple pathogens to make their way on several surfaces throughout your kitchen. It doesn't matter if you clean it with hot water and detergent because it's still there. It'll be released in the air when you cook it through the steam, etc. And nobody would really do that anyways before they cook. There's also an issue of lead exposure in the bone broth. There was a study that was done on organic chicken that found that levels of lead in some bone broth was 10 times higher than the water was used to make the broth. However, no, this was done on organic chicken. 99% of the chicken sold in the US is not organic, so it actually is probably far worse. The next section is pigs, pork, and bacon. It's interesting to note that animals such as pigs are more emotionally intelligent than babies, as I mentioned before. And nobody would justify killing a baby for food. They would say it's immoral, but killing a pig for food, which feels emotion, is not immoral. This is speciesism and propaganda. Speciesism is discrimination against a being because of their species. Americans enslave and kill more than 100 million pigs each year. In these tiny gestation crates, which is the crates that they are stored in for pregnancy, female pigs are repeatedly and forcibly impregnated against the rules with long steel vices that are thrust into them painfully. They are unwillingly baby machines for the meat industry. As soon as their reproductive capacity is finished, they are sent to slaughterhouses where they're chopped into hundreds of pieces, along with millions of other pigs that have been genetically engineered to reach 225 to 300 pounds in 6 months. This is also very unnatural, and you have a hard time even walking around. This is where the whole idea of pigs fat as a pig or eating like a pig comes from, is because of these pigs have been genetically engineered. If you find pigs in the wild, which are called hogs, they are not fat at all. They're actually very thin and lean and strong, which is natural for a hog. Smithfield Company, the largest killer of pigs in the world, generates about $8 billion a year, killing 1,100 pigs every hour. Smithfield's 5 largest slaughterhouses kill more than 78,000 pigs every day. Shortly after birth, male piglets are mutilated in 4 horrific ways. First, they held upside down. Their tails are cut off without anesthetic because tail biting is common in overcrowded, unnatural conditions of factory farms. Then each baby has 2 to 8 teeth cut off right down the gum line with a pair of wire cutters. Devices, so when they fight and bite each other, they have no teeth to damage each other's flesh. Female pigs are forced to produce twice as many piglets in captivity than in the wild. Teeth cutting is also a huge wonder maker for the meat industry. This is because cutting out teeth of the babies allows the mother to nurse even more piglets, who will be eventually killed for a profit. Because when babies stuck on their mothers without teeth, wear and tear of the mother's nipples is kept to a minimum. Piglets also have a portion of the ears ripped out to mark them. This is called ear notching. In male piglets, they are castrated without anesthetic to pacify their industry-induced anger. The next section is sheep. People think that shearing sheep for fur is a harmless activity, but it's not. Folds of skin as long as the tail are cut off without anesthetic in an attempt to prevent flies from laying eggs near the rectum. Ironically, however, this bloody mutilation often actually attracts more insects. The sheep are manhandled against their will during shearing and suffer from painful cuts and enormous gashes, especially when done rapidly and without cautious supervision. Sheep stop producing quality wool, they always end up in the slaughterhouse. Australia is the #1 country for raising sheep and is the largest producer and exporter. Australian ranchers often raise merino sheep, which are not native to Australia and do not fare well in the harsh heat of Australia. This is because they have extremely wrinkly skin that was made for colder environments, and this causes them often to die of heat exhaustion during the summer. Australia is also very moist, and this attracts flies, resulting in maggot infestations known as fly strike. These maggots can eat the sheep alive. Ranchers perform a crude operation known as mousseling. Mousseling involves carving wide strips of skin around the lamb's tail to produce smooth scars that won't harbor fly larvae. Cutting the sheep's tail is often done with conjunction of mousseling to reduce feces and urine stains on the wool. And these mutilations are performed without the use of anesthesia most often. Each year, Australian sheep endure more than 50 million operations such as mousseling and tooth grinding that would be considered animal cruelty if done to dogs and cats. Many people believe that shearing brings relief to animals that would otherwise be too hot. This is only true if it's done in the summer, however. But in order to avoid losing any wool, ranchers shear sheep before they can naturally shed their winter coats, resulting in many sheep dying from exposure to the cold. So not only die from heat exhaustion, but also from being too cold as well. In the United States, sheep and lamb are often raised in factory farms where they spent their entire lives in filthy manure-filled well houses, or where they are raised on the range without any shelter from extreme weather conditions. Thousands of sheep die every year from harsh conditions and from overcrowding onto trucks. In the U.S., 30 million sheep are slaughtered every year. There are many alternatives to wool. These include cotton fleece, acrylic, ramie, and for hiking or cold weather, there are synthetic variants as well, such as polyester, acrylic, fleece, rayon, linen, microfiber. Oh, the next section is fish and seafood. To begin with, fish contain none of the protective phytochemicals, antioxidant fiber found only in foods of plant origins. Dark green vegetables, canola, soybean, walnut, tofu, pumpkin, flax, and wheat germs possess the heart-protective omega-3 fatty acids supposedly only found in fish. Plant foods contain no cholesterol as well. How much cholesterol should someone eat? A recent international conference of leading heart researchers concluded the optimal intake of cholesterol in the adult is probably 0. DHA and EPA affects every cell, every tissue, every organ in the body, cannot be replaced by any other nutrient. They also support brain and heart function, maintain vision, improve mood, and control inflammation. Only 24% of the population consumes either of these vital fats on a given day, and even the average intake is far below recommended amounts. So this is not an issue just for people who eat a exclusively plant-based diet. It is an issue of the general population as well. The body can convert alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, and omega-3 found in flaxseed oil, walnuts into DHA and EPA, but not very efficiently. People who eat a plant-based diet should look into getting DHA and EPA from supplements made from microalgae, which is the ultimate source of omega-3 in fish and in fish oil supplements. Getting these supplements from microalgae is better than fish oil because fish oil is often contaminated with ocean-borne toxins such as mercury that are found in fish. For people who eat a plant-based diet, Dr. Dienberg recommends supplementing with at least 200 to 300 milligrams combined total of DHA and EPA, roughly up to 1,000 milligrams combined total. This is password, where certain diseases like arthritis are present, up to 3,000 milligrams are suggested. And now we'll be going over if fish feel pain, and they absolutely do, and this is also scientifically proven. It's not just merely my opinion. The International Association for the Study of Pain defined pain as an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage, or described in terms of such damage with the condition that 1. Pain is always subjective, 2. Is sometimes reported in the absence of tissue damage, and 3. The definition of pain should try avoiding pain as an external eliciting stimulus. These last 3 points are very important. One of the most critical concepts about pain is the distinction between nociception and pain. When you cut your finger, that stimulus activates your nociceptors, and these receptors are sensory neurons that respond to potentially damaging stimuli by sending signals to your spinal cord and then those from your spinal cord to your brain. So essentially, if you were to cut your finger, your body's letting you know that you are being hurt. Nociceptors are often incorrectly called pain receptors. These are interpreted as pain in the brain. Nociception is purely a neurological response, where pain perception is largely psychological and emotional. Here's a distinction. If you're on anesthesia during surgery, your nociception and neuroreceptors will still be firing and carrying signals to the brain. However, as you're unconscious while under the anesthesia, you cannot interpret a signal as pain, thus do not experience pain. Neuroscientist Patrick David Wall, the world's leading expert on pain, clarifies activity induced in the nociceptor and nociceptive pathways by noxious stimulus is not pain. It is always a psychological state. The go-to source for the fish don't feel pain argument is by Dr. James Rose, who argues that because fish lack a neocortex that they associated with consciousness and awareness, they cannot feel pain. He says that the voidus of negative stimulus such as electric shocks are simply unconscious reflective responses and they're not actually feeling pain. Sea amoeba, corals, and jellyfish, for example, all possess nociception, but they do not feel pain. He compares fish's avoidance of stimulus of involuntary contorted facial reaction with people who are brain damaged, who possess no consciousness yet would physically react in a way we associate with pain when stimulated, in other words, when they have pain done to them. However, Dr. Stephanie Yu, in her report Fish and Pain Perception, points out that one of the major flaws in Rose argues is the fact that it hinges on the neocortex being the sole means in which pain can be experienced, which suggests that it is the seat of consciousness. She goes on to state, a cursory view of the neurobiology of consciousness shows that both the complexity of the phenomena of consciousness and the conscious phenomena such as pain are not restricted to any one location in the brain. The neocortex is unique to mammals. His theory would eliminate birds, amphibians, and other non-mammalian animals, and even some animals from having the capacity of feeling pain, which is unfounded and scientifically unproven. Comparing a fish to any other different species than our own, rather than understanding their unique physiology, is greatly flawed. It has been known as well with whether fish feel pain or not. Aside from the pain inflicted upon the fish when they're hooked, and gutted and descaled while they're still alive, they also die from the slow process of drowning. Imagine how terrifying and painful it would be. Just as we cannot live without air, fish cannot live without water. Many fish are caught or left to gasp on a bed of ice while they die a terrifying and painfully slow death. The Humane Slaughter Act of the United States, which is itself a joke, because there's no such thing as humane slaughter, does not include any provision for fish, poultry, rabbits, or any other animals besides cattle, pig, and sheep. There is no regulation on the treatment of fish. And because it's so easy to regulate them as subhuman status, given how they are in appearance and behavior, the deaths are absolutely brutal. Another issue about fish is mercury. Nearly all fish and seafood contain some amount of mercury, which is known to cause cancer, birth defects, and reproductive function. That is why the government has a warning label on all fish products about mercury and why it can cause these issues. That's why it's highly recommended for mothers to not consume this. There's also the issue of oil spills as well, which are very common around fishing areas. And then what you're eating is oil-contaminated fish as well. The 18 billion marine animals every year that are killed in the United States, some are genetically engineered on a fish farm, while the rest are hooked by mouth or netted by huge trawlers that catch and kill everything in their path, which is essentially a giant net that is the size of multiple boats and catches absolutely anything, even if they don't want to catch certain animals. It's essentially a easy way of catching a huge amount of fish, and it's completely indiscriminate, and it destroys the environment by destroying coral reefs and other wildlife that the fishers do not even want to catch. Here's an analogy to help you empathize with fish and how it's like to be fished, essentially. Imagine you're walking down a road lined with apple trees and you're hungry from the walk and you grab a piece of fruit. Suddenly your hand becomes a pail with a large metal hook that pulls you out of the air into an atmosphere which you cannot breathe. There's also a great video on this as well, which I have linked in the references, that essentially is a skit that is what it would be like to be fished by a fish, ironically. Fish also has dioxin and PPCs in the mix, and fish meat is generally the most contaminated food product available, which is why you see warnings and labels on it more than any other form of meat. And people will say fish is brain food, but it's actually the opposite because of the reasons I mentioned before, of all the toxins. The major components of fish are fat and protein. There is no carbohydrate, no dietary fiber, no vitamin C in fish. Because many fish are high on the food chain, they're highly contaminated with environmental chemicals. It's not to read that certain kinds of fish, as swordfish, tuna, and shark, contain enough levels to be considered a health hazard. Fish is very high in fat. Almost 60% of the calories come from fat. The fat is incorporated into the person's body and increases the risk of obesity. Fish fat, omega-3 fat, will increase a person's risk of cancer and increase the risk of metastasis, which is the spread of cancer to other parts of the body. Fish fat is known to paralyze the actions of insulin and increase the tendency of high blood sugars and eventually diabetes, known to suppress the immune system and known to increase the tendency of serious bleeding. Like all animal products, fish are high in cholesterol, even more than other forms of meat, much higher. Based upon a weight of 100 grams, mackerel will contain 95 milligrams of cholesterol, haddock 65, tuna 63, and halibut 50 milligrams. Beef has 70 milligrams, chicken 60, and pork 70. The average amount of milligrams per 100 calories of cholesterol for fish is 50, while the rest is much lower for pork at 24, beef at 29, chicken at 44. There may be also a link between the consumption of the neurotoxin BMAA produced from algae blooms, and it may increase the risk of ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. It now appears that BMAA is found in high concentration in aquatic animals in the world. This could explain ALS clustering around lakes in New Hampshire, up to 25 times the expected rate of ALS for some families eating fish several times a week, or in Wisconsin, where the most significant ALS risk factor was the past consumption of fish out of Lake Michigan, or the clustering in Finland's Lakeland district, or seafood eaters in France around the Baltic Sea, particularly in fishes, mussels, and oysters. The increase of these algae blooms, which cause BMAA, is likely that we have exposed to it throughout our history, but these higher rates of increased algae blooms often because of fishing activities, and especially industrialized agriculture. More people means more sewage, fertilized manure, which can mean more algae, which can mean more exposure to this neurotoxin, leading to possible increased incidence of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. Fish is also very infectious, one of the most infectious meats. In the United States, seafoods ranked third on the list of products which contain foodborne illnesses between 1983 and 1992. The most commonly reported marine toxin disease in the world is Sigurata terra, which is associated with reef fish such as barracuda, grouper, and snapper. There are around 20,000 cases worldwide. This presents the issues of diarrhea, abdominal cramps, vomiting, paresthesias, pain in the teeth, urination, blurred vision, and heart block. Another issue is mercury is known to be toxic to the nervous system and kidneys, but long-term exposure may also increase the risk and accelerate the development of atherosclerosis, which is hardening of the arteries, by promoting free radical damage to arteries. Fish can be a major source of mercury, and it's very toxic one called methylmercury. This doesn't counteract all the hypothesized benefits omega-3 fats on prevention of heart disease. Unless they've been specifically removed from the process, fish oil supplements contain large amounts of cholesterol that will raise the blood cholesterol people. People say that clams, oysters, shrimp, and other mollusks and crustaceans do not feel pain. However, they are all sentient beings who possess nerve ganglia, which means they have central nervous system, giving them the capacity to feel pain, experience fear, happiness, and many other emotions. Ikea, which is a fruit, beans, blackcurrant seed oil, blue-green algae, borage seed oil, cabbage, canola oil, flax oil and seeds, chlorea, corn, leafy green vegetables, hemp, pine nuts, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, soy, sprouts, squash, vegetable oils, walnuts, and wheat all contain omega fatty acids without cholesterol, enormous amounts of saturated fat, trans fats, animal protein, and most importantly, without cruelty. If somebody told you to smoke cigarettes because they contain trace amounts of omegas or calcium, they do not. But imagine if they did. Would you do it? No. Yet those who consume animal-based food engage in the same kind of behavior by eating meat, cheese, milk, and eggs, putting these other products in their bodies on the pretense of attaining trace amounts of secondary nutrients. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras said, "Men dig their graves with their own teeth and die more by those instruments than by weapons of their enemies." In other words, people are more likely to die from how they diet than to be killed by somebody, which has essentially been true throughout all of human history. The original research that led to DHA being named as necessary for human brain function was based solely on the discovery that the human brain is contrary with DHA, therefore humans must consume DHA. However, one of the reasons for this possibly was a industry-funded study in order to sell fish oil supplements to people, because they would market them as people needed DHA, so they would sell fish oil supplements to give them DHA. When you eat a chicken breast or drink cow's milk, the body does not just move that protein to your biceps bone. The body has to break it down and try to work with it to manufacture what it needs. The DHA and EPA argument from fish is not a valid argument, because the moment you consume fish oil flesh, the brain uses what you have eaten in that form, but does not because it cannot. The DHA and EPA consumed will, just like everything else, get broken down, and what the body does after that is a different story and subject. False nutrition science has led us to believe, and the meat industry has led us to believe, that since we are made of protein and we are animals and our muscles are made of meat, which need protein, that we need to consume animal-based protein. The dairy industry convinced everyone that since our bones are rich in calcium, we must consume something that is rich in calcium, even if it's poorly absorbed. But animals' products are never main sources of protein, calcium, and any other nutrient that we need. And then this logic also follows for fish. It told us that since our brains are made of DHA fatty acid, that we need to consume DHA from their products, most oftentimes or almost always fish or fish oils. The viability of fatty acids from fish are very delicate, meaning they're not stable when exposed to heat, light, or air. Depending on the oil, they'll generally turn rancid after about 15 minutes of exposure. Only 15 minutes. Isn't that crazy? With that in mind, remember that fish oil and fish is cooked at extremely high temperatures, and then will be exposed to light and air many times before it reaches anyone's mouth, which means that the EFA benefits that everyone desires are not actually received. In other words, fish and fish oil EFA from cells interrupt regular cell respiratory responses. The EFA found in flax, chia, and hemp seeds are rich in omegas and will aid in the assimilation of other nutrients made by the body that are obtained from fixed vegetable, which is precisely what we need for exceptional wellness. Do not succumb to the methods of marketing and fakes in industry-funded science. They have infiltrated hospital, schools, and universities and the media, and it is quite remarkable how doctors and professors will say fish oils are good for your brain, but however, if you try to contradict them, they will have no evidence and will be unable to contradict that statement. One of the reasons is because doctors often receive only 4 hours of nutrition, yet one of the original doctors in the world, Hippocrates, said, "Let thy food be thy medicine." And all doctors take an Hippocratic oath. The next section is silk. Should we know that silk is produced by a number of insects such as web spinners, bees, wasps, ants, silverfish, mayflies, thrips, leafhoppers, beetles, lacewings, fleas, flies, and midges, and other amphipods as well, such as spiders. However, silkworms are responsible for the vast majority of the commercial silk industry. The silk industry goes back to 5,000 years ago to 3630 BC in ancient China, where silk farming was born. When a Bombyx mori, which is the common silkworm used for the production of silk, they hatch within 10 to 14 days. Depending on the needs of the farm, they're often placed in refrigeration for months at a time for up to a year. Once warming up again, they're hatched in the same time frame. The silk is secreted from two salivary glands in the head of the larva and consists of two proteins, fibrin, the structural center, and sericin, the gum which cements the filaments. So in other words, these elegant dresses and luxurious sheets are simply words spent. Silkworms create cocoons, which is where silk comes from, and when they become moths, they have to chew their way out, and it severely shortens the length of the silk threads and increases their value on the luster of the silk produced. To avoid destruction of raw materials, silk farmers will kill the larva or the silkworm by immersing it in boiling water and, less commonly, freezing them or piercing them with a needle. This is performed within 2 days and 2 weeks after spinning has begun and before they transform into moths. Once the larva is dead, cocoons are soaked in water and or easily enrolled. The larvae are then discarded or in some countries eaten. If they are allowed to pass, the people say, they will emerge from cocoons as moths may lay eggs and then die naturally after about a week because they can no longer eat and rely upon the nutrients that they took in during their larva stage. Just how many silkworms are killed every year from the production of silk? According to the Food and Agriculture Organization United Nations 2005 reports that about 70 million pounds of raw silk are produced each year. However, there's no actual definite number. However, most recent figures from the FAO from 2012 state that 161,000 metric tons of raw silk was produced, meaning 356,401,498 pounds are actually produced. If we go to the more conservative 2013 estimate from the ICC of 159,776 metric tons and apply the range of worms killed per kilogram, we end up anywhere between from over 703 billion and possibly over 2 trillion worms killed for silk in 2013. If we took the less reputable study from 2005 in the United Nations of 70 million pounds of silk, we end up with over 139 billion to over 475 billion worms killed in a single given year. For a fabric that consists for less than 0.2% of the world's fabric market, that's a staggering amount of death toll. If you're wondering whether silkworms in general are sentient and are able to feel pain, studies conducted with morphine demonstrate insect responses as being indicative of inability to feel pain, although the scientific community remains conflicted. Silkworms possess a central nervous system and a brain, effectively say no exception, but an in-depth investigation to the ability to feel pain, even if their death was painless, which is just merely an assumption, is still a death and a human-induced premature one death as well. There are many alternatives to silk, including rayon, nylon, milkweed, sea pod fibers, silk cotton trees, salvia tree, filaments, polyester, tinsel, lyocell, cotton, etc. And these are all alternatives to silk that do not involve any animal cruelty. The next section I will be bringing up is horses, and specifically the next part will be horse racing. Thoroughbred horse racing has a world of injury, drug abuse, cruise and brace down, and also eventually slaughter involved. Horses are used for racing or forced to sprint, often on the threat of warp or even electric shocking devices. They are used so fast and frequently that they can sustain injuries on the horse and even hemorrhage from the lungs. Most horses are subject to cocktails of legal and illegal drugs intended to mask injuries artificially enhance performance. Many horses, called bleeders by the racing industry, will bleed from their lungs occasionally known to exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage. In an attempt to decrease the bleeding, many horses are given a drug called Lasix or Salix, which improves performance. Every week, an average of 24 horses experience fatal breakdowns at racetracks across the country, and this number doesn't take into account the horses that are discarded by the racing industry when they're no longer profitable. In New York, in 2015 alone, more than 250 horses induced injuries or fatal breakdowns during races. Ownership turnover of thoroughbreds are quite often. They even have claiming races which allow horses to be purchased and taken away by a new owner immediately after race, giving all previous owners sole control over the horses and out. Because no one individual is committed to a horse to his or her lifetime, each day brings a new uncertainty for these animals. An estimated 10,000 unprofitable thoroughbred horses are trucked from the US to Canada, Mexico, and Saudi arabia every year. And despite these numbers, the racing industry continues to turn out nearly 20,000 thoroughbred horses every year. All the time, these thoroughbred horses, because of the way they've been genetically engineered, have ankle injuries because these horses are going to be far larger and more muscular than they're intended to be, which means that their ankles cannot support their body's weight. The terms breaking a horse doesn't involve just convincing the horse, but involves being physically and psychologically abusive to the horse. Getting horses to allow saddle on the back is the first step of domination. They essentially whip the horse in right enough to make them accept their fate as essentially being a slave to the owner. Horses realize they must acquiesce to the demands of the human captors or they face consequences, which can include food or water deprivation or even killing. if the horse is deemed unmanageable. When the saddle is finally attached, the horse typically tries to take it off because the clinch is painfully tight around the hypersensitive waist area. There's also the bit, which is the part of a racing horse that is put in their mouth. It's a cruel device which is actually shoved into the mouths of African American slaves in America as they were auctioned off, and this forces the horses into full submission. When the rein is of the horse in order to get them to stop, the implement grinds out their teeth to rip their mouth and cheek area so the horse will submit to the demands of the rider and turn left or right to stop. The mouth is one of the most sensitive parts of the body, so making it not only even to control someone this way, but also it makes it fallacious for people in the racing and equestrian industry to call themselves horse loving. Intentionally inflicting pain or discomfort on someone else is hateful, not loving. Many racing mates also claim that horses love to run. This is misleading in two ways. First, loving to run and being forced to run is two different things. Every animal just about loves, except for the sloth, loves to run. This is a ridiculous rationalization. People and animals want to run on their own terms, however, when they feel like it. Also, horses don't run as much as they do when they are trained as well. If you go and watch horses in their natural environments, you'll see that they hardly ever run. They may walk, but most of the part they stand still and graze. Many people start riding horses when they reach around the age 2 in racing and 3 in leisure riding. Dr. Bennett's detailed schedule shows that the last plates of their growth plates, which are growing in order to be a adult healthy horse, which is around 8 to 9 years, and these plates take about that long to grow, and people are riding them on their back, which is a very sensitive body part, and it can become permanently injured from riding on the backs of horses from this as well, and pain as well. Alexander Nezarov of Nezarov Kole say to horses' back is not a seat, not a place for a human butt, nor a piece of meat, not some sort of terra firma. There's a very complex and tender and anatomical structure with extraordinary functions. Besides the obvious biomechanical function, the back has another very important function. Spinal cord's work is to guarantee that the function in the back has another very important function. The spinal cord work is to guarantee the response for the entire nervous system can communicate the sense of the taste, smell, vision, hearing, and vestibular function to the brain, not to get lost too much detail on this especially vulnerable sensitive organ. Onto the medulla spinalis, the back of the brain of the back, sits the rider. In a 2007 study by Matilina, Homer, and colleagues, out of the 295 horses in the study who were considered physically sound upon initial examination, 91.5% were diagnosed with some kind of alteration of the spinal processes after X-ray. Almost always the spinal process of the saddle position were affected. The bits of horses which can cause pain and damage to a horse's cranial nerves as well as their teeth, tongue, and palate. Visual nerve are extremely close to the skin and thus extremely sensitive. It is essential to understand that there are absolutely no way to use a bit without the horse feeling pain. People will use whips and they say that, well, a horse has thick skin, so it's okay to whip a horse but not a dog. But that is not really the truth. The area of the muscle, vastus lataris, the thickness rarely 6.2 millimeter, and the skin determinus, and the epidermis is determined. It's supplied with large amount of nerves, and it's made to whip. It's like of course they're gonna feel pain, and they do feel pain from whipping, or otherwise they wouldn't go faster because they're under duress. So that is why they go faster. Because if they do not go faster, then we will whip more, and that means they'll feel more pain. So that is how they avoid being hurt, essentially. Or they believe that if they go faster, they will be hurt less. So that is what they do. They can play with their masters. Even the most gentlest of hands still exert extreme pressure on the horse's mouth nerves, around 50 to 100 kilograms per 1 square centimeter on the mouth surface. So that means there's this old saying of a harsh bit in a good hands can be mild, and a mild bit is as only harsh as the hands controlling it, but this is not necessarily true. A bit is always going to cause pain, and this is scientifically proven as well. This causes the development of bone spurs. The joint of a dental bit also hits into the horse's palate when pressure is applied to the reins, causing inferior alveolar nerve and infraorbital nerve to transmit plain signals. Bits also obstruct a horse's airways and interfere with breathing, which is special callback, seeing as bits are mostly used when making great physical demands upon a horse, where they would need more breathing. In the 2002 study, The Effect of the Bit and the Behavior on the Horse, Doctor concluded that the bit is responsible for at least 50 problems. The 4 most frequently cited effects were to instill fear, to make the horse fight back, trigger flight response, and to cause facial neuralgia, head shaking. There and other behavioral effects were associated primarily with oral pain. However, the responses were not limited to the oral cavity, and they include a whole cascade of systematic effects. Predominantly, these involve the nervous system and result in adverse and behavioral responses. Musculoskeletal system effects interfere with locomotion. Respiratory system effects cause dysnopia. It was concluded that a bit is harmful to health and safety for both the horse and the rider, and an impedance to performance. It is important to note that using a bit is not only detrimental to the horse but also the rider. A bitted horse is in a state of fear and pain, much less likely to respond according to direction, often leading to the injury of both the horse and the rider. This is also why you see bitted horses often opening their mouths to attempt to escape the pain inflicted by the bit. They also shake their heads and perform other neurotic behaviors in order to stop the pain. Unfortunately, riders often respond to this effort by applying even more pressure to the horse's bit, causing more pain acting out of the part of the horse, which obviously if the horse acts crazy enough, they're going to throw off the rider, and that can cause pain for both parties, both the horse and the person riding them. Pain medication is often used to mask injury, and they are not too expensive to treat, and they're not discarded, but they are continued to run. And as many as 90% of horses that break down have pre-existing injuries. According to Professor and veterinarian Dr. Paul McGreevy, the paddling failed to protect horses, and 64% of strikes and 83% of whip impacts showed visibly indentations into the skin, and some 74% of strike hitting the horse's flank in contravention of international agreement on breeding, racing, and wagering. He found that 70% of strikes were delivered backhand, thus were not counted under the rules on the limiting number of strikes. In many countries, the number of strikes is limited only until the last final 100 meters when horses may be whipped ceaselessly. The racing industry asserts that whips must be padded and used obviously only to stimulate the horse, not to cause pain, although all it really does is cause them pain, which stimulates them because they're under coercion and they want the pain to stop so they comply with the master, as I said before. McGreevy took himself further and did a study on his own leg after sleeving a standard blow to his thigh. The white area showed inflammation 30 minutes after a single blow. People argue that horses are much larger animals, they have thicker skin and higher pain tolerance. There's nothing to support this claim, and McGreevy points out that horses can feel a fly land on their skin such that it triggers a characteristic shake called a paniculus reflex. In other words, they are very sensitive creatures, even if they did have thick skin. Race horses and trainmen are also stable for the majority. This is the most practical way to store a horse, and this isolation robs them of social and environmental stimulation. They can develop neurotic behavior such as crib biting, where they bite on the fences and other fixed objects, as well as swings back and forth, and self-mutilation. Ultimately, after a horse stops being able to race, if they do not die before then they will be sent to slaughter. The next section is duck down or foie gras. Down is the soft feathers of duck and geese. Most birds, such as duck, live in factory farms, must endure tough handling throughout their lives, especially when their feathers are ripped from their chest during pluckings. A goose may live through 4 or 5 pluckings before he or she is slaughtered. When it becomes more expensive to keep the animal than their feathers were, they are simply slaughtered. Hundreds of thousands of ducks and geese are murdered annually by the foie gras industry. Steel poles are shoved down their throats 3 times a day to force feed them up to 4 pounds of grains or fattened up to over 10 times the natural size. These diseased livers is then turned into a dish called foie gras. There's also some other industry or some other products you may not think have animal products in them, but they actually do. And this next section I'm starting out with is tobacco, cigars, and cigarettes. The main areas of concern are animal ingredients, cigarettes, animals killed in tobacco farming practices, animal testing in the tobacco industry, environmental impact on smoking, which of course affects animals and us as well, secondhand smoke and companion animals, the hidden cost of tobacco, and some of the health consequences of smoke. The most basic measure of whether someone is abiding by a plant-based lifestyle is not as whether the products they buy or consume contain animal products. Up to 600 ingredients are found in cigarettes, including arsenic, formaldehyde, lead, ammonia, acetone, and far less other pronounceable elements. It's difficult to tell whether these are animal derived, and also because there are so many. Beeswax and costrium are often used in cigarettes. Beeswax, of course, is from bees, and costrium is an extract made from the dried ground up anal sacs located by the anal glands of beavers. It's added to foods such as gums, alcohol, candy, and baked goods. It's harvested by killing beavers and cutting out their glands, castoral glands. Animal testing is the largest questionable aspect of the tobacco industry. There are many alternative and viable research methods that don't involve animals. The tobacco industry often tests on animals to determine the safety of their products, although they're not, of course, safe at all, as everyone knows, but they still are legally required to test them. Dr. C. Ray Greek of America for Medical Advancement states that animal experiments failed notoriously to demonstrate a smoking cancer connection for over half a century. If the greatest killer of our time was quoted by physicians based on animal experiments, there's obviously something terribly wrong with the system. However, tobacco products are not required to undergo animal testing. However, they still do, oftentimes. Even the tobacco industry still studies have included in vitro toxicology tests can successfully be used for better understanding of biological activity of cigarette smoke, and for guiding development of cigarettes with reduced toxicity. Despite this fact, tobacco companies, government agencies, the American Cancer Society, the Natural Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, among other organizations, even anti-smoking groups continue to test cigarettes on animals. These tests are often done on dogs, mice, and rats, although not so much dogs anymore after a public outrage in 1975 by Mary Beth and the Smoking Beagles, but essentially 48 beagles were placed in straitjackets and then forced to inhale smoke and lung stains a day out for up to 3 years, and then they were killed at the end. For the mice and rats, their entire bodies are crammed in tiny canisters that pump smoke directly into their noses for 6 or more hours a day for up to 2 years. There's also an environmental impact of smoking. Around 5.6 trillion cigarette butts are dumped into the environment every year. When these buds land in water on the soil, all the chemicals and carcinogenic ingredients create lechiates, and it's a toxic soup that poisons fish and other wildlife. A series of studies at Tufts University and Colorado State University found that secondhand smoke is just as harmful to companion animals as to humans. Cats living with smokers twice likely develop malignant lymphoma, and dogs living with smokers develop cancers of the nose and sinus area, all of which are terminal within a year. The next industry is the leather industry. It is found in belts, jackets, shoes, handbags, wallets, phone cases, etc. It can come from cows, alligators, pigs, kangaroos, ostriches, sheep, goats, dogs, etc. Any animal has a hide can have leather made out of it technically. Much of the leather is produced in China and India. India, where the cows are sacred, they found alternative methods of indirectly killing cows for others, such as making them march for many miles without water feed. In China, estimated 2 million dogs and cats are skinned every year, but for the love of producing these animals is incorrectly made. Dog skin is worn by unsuspecting Westerners who think they're wearing dead cow. Undercover investigation of Chinese farms show that dogs and cats were being stolen from families. But there's no such thing as humane leather, because the production of leather involves torture, cruelty, and ultimately death. Turning skin to leather requires the use of incredibly dangerous chemicals, including formaldehyde and coal tar derivatives, as well as the chromium and cyanide-based oils, and can be very dangerous to workers. Exposure to these toxic chemicals has led to heavily disabled children being born, skin disease, and erosion. It causes environmental damage as well as, like I said before, inhaling the chemicals of the production of leather also harms the tanners as well. Leather production is hazardous to the environment. Toxins that are emitted from leather tanneries can endanger humans and ecological health by polluting regional waterways with mineral salts, formaldehyde, coal tar derivatives, oils, dyes, salt, lime, sludge, sulfides, and acid. Residents of tannery sounds have a greater than average chance of developing leukemia, and more than half of all tannery workers develop testicular cancer. The leather industry uses an enormous amount of energy. Huge amounts of possibilities are claimed from raising, transporting, and killing animals who are skinned for leather. Synthetics such as fleece vinyl actually require few petroleum products to produce. When looking for clothing or shoes, looking for all man-made materials on the tag. Most shoes come with either a stitched-in tag or a sticker on the insole with symbols denoting what the shoe is made from. Diamonds and checkerboard shapes mean plastic and cloth. If the drawing looks like a stretched animal hide, the shoe contains leather. Many stores, however, remove the tags from display shoes, so you can find one in the back room which still contains tags. So ask one of the employees if they can find one in the back room that still contains the tags. There's also another industry that many people will think of when they think of animal products, and that is the medical industry. The issue with medicine is not as much as the animal products that are within the medication, although most animal medication does not contain animal products, some do, but more the indirect reason that the fact that medication is often required to be tested on animals before it can be produced on the market. And the most common ingredient is gelatin. Gelatin is often used as part of a capsule storing a medication. It can also be in the ingredients and tablets. Gelatin, the way it's produced, is absolutely disgusting. Gelatin is a protein attained by boiling the skin, tendons, ligaments, or bones of animals with water at a facility called a rendering plant. That's where the leftovers and rejects of the meat industry, as well as broken these animals, go to be boiled into water and have the elements sucked out like gelatin, then put into your pudding, jello, pet food, shampoos, face masks, cosmetic, candies, marshmallows, cakes, ice cream, yogurt, some wines, photographic films, and yes, vitamins and medication. There's such thing as vegetable gelatin called agar-agar, which is seaweed derived, and there's also lactose as another common ingredient in medications. The carrier stabilizer, or in other words, it's used to create bulk. Medications from thyroid medicine to birth control pills contain lactose. There's also shellac. Shellac is a resin found created by the female lac bug on trees in the forests of India and Thailand. It has many uses, from sealing wood to coating your fruit, and it can be also used to make your plants look all shiny. Magnesium stearate is a preservative, lubricant, and like gelatin, it can come from either a plant or animal source, but it's often noted that when applied, it is the ester of magnesium stearic acid, which is sourced from the fat of cows, pigs, sheep, dogs, or cats. There are so many ingredients in medicines and that can be found in so many products that you have to really do your own research. However, this was just a quick rundown of some of them. It should be noted that by law in the United States, all medicine and medical procedure must be tested on animals before they become passed on to the market and be sold on the market. They are FDA approved anyways. Animal testing for medicine is ineffective and actually does not save lives, but in fact harms lives because it often produces false results. And there's more money involved in the testing than actually wanting to be concerned about the safety of people taking the products and medications. The first thing you should do is try to prevent your conditions. Try to prevent needing a medication in the first place. You can try to find herbal remedies or try to find a pharmacy that produces medications that avoid gelatins, capsules, and other ingredients. If you have a certain condition that requires medication or a severe mental illness that's preventing you from doing anything but resistant to anything but prescription medication, you should try to go as far as possible to obtain a plant-based medicine. However, if you are in desperate need of medical assistance and if the medicine that you must put into your body has animal products in it, then you need to do that because you need to keep yourself healthy so you can be a powerful voice for the animals. There's also the question of alcohol, which is in the next section. Believe it or not, many liquors contain dairy, and some drinks like Campari are made with carmine, which is a red food coloration derived from the dry, crushed red bodies of pregnant female Dactylopius coccus. Certain ingredients include albium from eggs or dried blood, casein from milk, charcoal, which is often from animal bone, colorings like carmine derived from insects, glycerol, monostearate, and antivenom agent that sometimes is animal derived from the breakdown of fats, lactose or lactobacillus or lactic acid, gelatin made from bone, skin, and tendons, pepsin derived from pigs, sugar is often white used in bone charcoal, honey from bees, chitin fries from shells of crabs, lobsters, etc., and isinglass derived from the swim bladders of fish. The next section is tattoos. Tattoos can sometimes be derived from charcoal and soot derived from the charred bones of animals. However, most tattoos are actually derived from plants or metal. Glycerin can be from plants or from animal fats depending on the company, so you may have to ask about the company and if their inks are derived from plant sources. Many artists use Vaseline or petroleum jelly during tattooing, and Vaseline brand jelly can contain bone char depending on the country and is also tested on animals. There are other alternatives that we use to lay up your skin during a session besides petroleum jelly, such as shea butter, jojoba oil, and olive oil. You can also just do it dry as well. Disposable razors are often used for shaving near tattoos. Almost always contain glycerin, a moistening strip, and are also tested on animals. Many aftercare lotions and ointments include beeswax, lanolin, like A&D ointment or cod liver oil. There are plenty of plant-based aftercare alternatives. Some people also use organic coconut oil for after when they get a tattoo. There's also bees and honey. People wonder what honey is. It's essentially the vomit of a bee and it's regurgitated. They throw up themselves. Then they take the nuts and they digest it and throw up its for their own cells. They're not producing it for us. We call it honey. Who in the right mind would want to call a product bee vomit? Do insects feel pain? It is not absolutely certain, but it is better. But it's likely, and it's better to be safe. Many beekeepers will clip the wings of queen bees to prevent them from leaving their hives, and some will burn the hives instead of keeping them for to save cost. It's better to assume that bees are being harmed in the production of honey than to assume that they are not being harmed. You're also stealing honey for the bees, which is theirs, not yours. Even if you steal a little bit, theft is theft. Bees use honey to insulate their hives and as food during winter. Traditional beekeepers let bees keep half of their honey when they steal it. Now, 100% of honey is stolen, and bees are fed corn syrup, which is extremely healthy to begin with, but especially for bees. According to Henry Watson, the founder of plant-based lifestyle in the modern age, honey is not a plant-based lifestyle food. And according to him, honey from a high species is essentially distilling a much needed food item from an animal. Additionally, commercial beehives control the process of honey making, stacking their and removal trays, trapping the queen in a certain part of the hive, and smoking out the hives when retrieving the honey. Honey cannot be part of a plant-based lifestyle due to the methods of commercial beekeeping. Some argue that the middle number of bees harmed in the production of honey for human consumption is seeming no more than insect harm in the production of vegetables, even of the organic variety. However, one must consider the act of intentionally harming exploitation done by beekeeping versus harming fruits and vegetables and accidentally killing them. The reason that queen bees are clipped is to prevent them from flying away, because if they flew away, the bees would no longer produce honey, so they need to have the queen bee's wings clipped, so that way the bees are constantly producing honey. The alternatives that mimic the taste, the texture of honey, such as agave nectar, bee-free honey, or rice-based honey, is actually poisonous to the human digestive tract, according to T.C. Fry of Life Science Health Systems. Humans don't have enzymes to break down these acids that are found in honey, and so people must rob their bodies of vital base form nutrients and minerals to neutralize the acids. When people eat honey, it immediately begins to reabsorb moisture from the stomach and stomach flora. It destroys our symbiotic bacteria population wholesale. And as a matter of fact, several tablespoons of honey can make most people sick, very sick in fact. Consuming honey is acid forming and it leaches calcium from the teeth and bones to neutralize the acid. Mantite acid of honey is a poison. It interacts with protein and from this forms alcohol, anomia, and carbonic acid. Honey is an awful food. There's also the strange question of figs. People say that figs aren't part of a plant-based diet because wasps must get into figs to reproduce, but sometimes the wisp can't get out of the fig. The wasp may need figs in order to reproduce, and the fig requires wasps to pollinate, so it's a symbiotic relationship between figs and wasps, not a parasitic or a predator-prey relationship. And this is only true for the Semierina fig types. The figs are not designed in nature to trap the wasp. The figs have inside that will break down the wasp so that you'll never find wasps in figs. Some farmers will import wasps to exploit the wasps in order to mass produce figs. Again, this is only for the Myrna fig species. There's also the soy deception, which is the next section. Unless you're allergic to it and be a great source of your diet, it contains all the amino acids, protein, calcium, iron, B vitamins, folic acid, and more. It also contains isoflavonoids, phytochemicals can reduce and treat and prevent diseases. Soy contains phytoestrogens, which is an estrogen-like plant compound. They are very weak estrogens, and phytoestrogens, you'll see a link to lower breast cancer, lower prostate cancer, lower cancer death rates, less kidney disease, a 13% decrease in LDL or bad cholesterol, and also lower levels of heart disease. People are also concerned about becoming like a woman or not being able to gain as much muscle. There's a study where men drink 400 milliliters or 1.7 cups of soy milk per day, which is a considerable amount. So testosterone levels stayed the same. It did slightly lower the type of estrogen. It was lowered by about 3%, which was not very much, but technically made them more manly, surprisingly. What happens when you feed men concentrated phytoestrogen? The thing to also consider about soy milk is that soy milk has far less nutrients than actual soybeans, and it's actually mostly water. 30% of men have what is called gynecomastia, or man boobs, and it can go away actually after a few months as the body of a man balances out. People might be wondering, how does soy consumption affect women? Well, it's worth noting that women with the highest soy protein intake through adolescent and early adult had over 60% lower risk of premenopausal breast cancer than women with the lowest intakes. It was a study that looked over 200 women who ate about 50 milligrams of soy phytoestrogens a day, and they concluded after years that there was no significant intervention effect on any of the serum hormones. This means blood levels of estrogen did not change. My analysis for some studies showed that consumption, now again, from soy found that phytoestrogens did not affect blood levels of estrogen in premenopausal women. Next section is fertilizers. A number of crops use animal fertilizers that include blood, bones, feces of other animals. However, this does not justify the torture, imprisonment, and slaughter of animals. There are alternatives such as nitrate-rich fertilizers, also you like these from wild dead animals, or allow animals into your plant farm to help with the fertilizing process. Not as much fertilizers would be needed because more plants are needed to grow animals and feed us than to just eat the plants directly, if we were to switch to the entire world having a plant-based diet. That was Next Level Thinking, the Non-Aggression Principle, Animals. This is the first part, and in the next episode, I'll be going over the second part and more aspects of the non-aggression principle. And I just want to say, no doubt that the most common numerous violation of non-aggression principle is the funding and slaughter of animals for their products. The next episode, I'll be continuing the series, and thank you for listening. See you next episode, which will come, I might release the next episode early. And the reason that this topic is going to take longer and it's going to take 2 episodes is because there's so much depth to this topic, and it's so critically important. And the reason that this topic also took so long is because of vacation and some needed relaxation, but I'll get back to making episodes at least every month. Please send a message at realnextlevelthinking@protonmail.ch if you wish to be on the podcast for an interview. Thank you and have an excellent day.